and we are all united with our goal to protect our country, to protect our city, to protect our neighborhood. Are you worried for your family, for your friends here? Of course I'm worried, because it's war, and it will be stupid to don't be worried. But I decided to stay here, and my wife stay here. Because who will protect our country if all people will go abroad?
Surrounding the city, the Ukrainian military is the first line of defense, setting up a perimeter to defend from the coming invasion. Inside, volunteers are setting up their own line of defense. So right now we're with a kind of makeshift militia. A week ago, 2 weeks ago, these guys were bakers, accountants. Today, they're soldiers. They have taken up arms that have been handed out by the military. They've marked themselves with these like yellow bands to show that they're newfound soldiers. And they're guarding all around the city. Some of them have experience, some of them don't.
Лен, иди на этот. Да, давай сюда.
So explain me what you're doing here today.
Осваиваю работу бармена на своем 74-м году жизни. К нам хотят пожаловать дорогие гости, но без горячительных напитков как-то неудобно.
Они попросили.
Marina Sibrova knows Russian aggression. She survived the war in Chechnya, and then a decade later escaped the war in
Alright, you guys, today we have another fake trip collaboration. That's right, and guess who's back? Jayhawk hoodie from the last video and Cheeto pants with some friends. So Camo Gator, Miss Bonnet, Cheeto pants, and Pink Leopard make their way inside the store. Pink Leopard's gonna look in the middle aisle for some delicious blow pops. Miss Bonnet's looking for the fountain pop machine, and she spotted it, so she's gonna make her way over there with Cheeto pants. And it looks like Camo Gator is gonna come to the door, and he's gonna make some small talk with the employee. You know, gotta make it look like you're a normal customer. So he's gonna take the long route to the pop machine, or is he? Nope, he's gonna stop. He changed his mind. So he's gonna come over here, he's gonna look up at the counter, he's gonna open up that cooler door, and he's gonna change his mind. And he's gonna make his way back towards the fountain pop machine with the rest of his buddies. Now, Pink Leopard, she is in line with a handful of blow pops. You know, you can't pass. Now he changed his mind. Come on now. And they're gonna have themselves a little powwow right outside the front door. So Camo Gator is gonna round these people, and he's gonna get in line like a normal paying customer. He's gonna take his hood off, and Cheeto Pants is gonna come out of left field, and he's gonna do a little circle right here, and then get in the back of the line for pretty much no reason at all. And Camo Gator is gonna turn around, say something to him, and then Cheeto Pants is gonna decide, you know what, yeah, I'm just gonna go outside. So Cheeto Pants goes outside, Camo Gator decides he's hungry, and he spots the cookies and cream Hershey's. So he's gonna grab a couple of those, then he's gonna get in the back of the line, because obviously you can't do it in front of another customer. So he's standing there, and he's gonna slowly slip those Hershey bars into his pocket right there. Yep, she gone. So Pink Leopard's gonna come over, and they're going to stand in line together. You know, you don't want to leave him all alone by himself. So they're gonna stand there patiently waiting so that he can pay for that delicious fruit punch that he's been sucking on. So they're gonna stand there, and they're gonna continue standing there, because I don't really want to do the fast forward sound right here. So they're gonna stand there, and they're gonna keep on waiting while she's bringing up the other guy right there. Yep, he's almost done. But wait a minute, someone's about to come inside. Someone's not done yet. Who is it? Oh, it looks like it's Cheeto Pants. Oh, look, how convenient. He came back in with a plastic bag. Wonder what he's going to do with that. So he spots the Hershey bars, and he's going to grab himself a handful of Hershey bars. He's having a hard time. Come on, little buddy. Yep. Oh, anybody paying attention? Nope. So he's going to grab those. He's going to drop. He's thinking about a muffin right there. Does he want a muffin? Nope, he don't. Oh, they're done. All right, so they're going to make their way back outside, and just like that, they just got away with a whole bunch of candy bars. She gone. If you know any of the people involved in this theft,
Let them have their Hershey bars. Let them steal their Hershey bars. They'll be dead by 25. What a bunch of assholes. Okay, I was watching this. I was working with that. Okay, I was gonna. Whoops. And this one. And this whip, I gotta fix that part.
Russian troops are said to have occupied the site of Europe's biggest nuclear power station after fierce fighting around the facility overnight, which drew outrage and condemnation from around the world. President Zelensky accused Russia of unprecedented terror, while NATO's chief warned that the suffering of the Ukrainian people was only likely to get worse, with towns and cities under siege and civilian deaths mounting. Fears of a potential nuclear disaster at the Zaporizhzhia plant spread alarm across world capitals today. Officials said that the fire in a training center was put out, and the nuclear watchdog confirmed that no radioactive material had been released. It is one of 4 active plants in Ukraine, providing more than a fifth of the country's total electricity generation. And we should warn you, there are some graphic images of this conflict in my piece.
Так виглядає руський мір.
Ruski mir, the Russian world, the breathless voice scoffs. You hear that phrase all the time. But on the road to Anehoda, it was more underworld than world. A monster barricade, courtesy of the local defense force and the employees of the nuclear power plant. A barricade that was eventually breached. This is what they were protecting, the biggest nuclear power station in Europe. The silent security footage doesn't do justice. A firefight around a nuclear reactor, the very definition of lunacy. A training facility was hit and the 4 reactors themselves remained unscathed. No excess radiation was detected. And yet this is only a few hundred miles from Chernobyl. The Russians are now in control here, and that means they also control 1/4 of all the electricity in Ukraine. Just down the road, the city of Melitopol had already fallen to the Russians a few days ago. But that didn't prevent the Ukrainians here from protesting in the main square. Shame they. Even if they lose this war, one cannot imagine them becoming the willing subjects of Moscow. So much for the gratefully liberating of Russian propaganda. Heading north on the road west of Kyiv, there's the otherwise unremarkable village of Voltizhin. What, one wonders, did the Russian troops have against this place? Why did she have to die? And why him? The senseless carnage of a war waged online.
А не хочу вже забирати, завертати пчатки, яка в машині. Ніхто не хоче підходити туди.
No wonder they all want to leave. The future has lost its promise. From space, it all looks so peaceful. The long lines of tanks crisscrossing the landscape, but rearranging everything in their path. Newly occupied Kherson, the Russians were trying to hand out food aid today in front of one of their own cameras. But the camera phone held by a local Ukrainian told a different story. Would you like food from the occupier, the man asks. No way comes the chorus, or words to that effect. Back here in Lviv, the Ukrainian government was keen to keep us up to speed with the so-called ceasefire talks, held intermittently with the Russians, possibly paving the way for humanitarian corridors out of besieged cities like Kyiv. The journalists, global and local, hungry for any information. But do you think that they're negotiating in good faith? And what is the point of these talks when there clearly is no ceasefire and the fighting continues?
No, yesterday we actually agreed for the very important point for the process and the protocols, how to do the humanitarian corridors and how to evacuate people who want to go away. Especially also like it's including the foreign students. We have about 5,000 Indian and Chinese students in Kharkiv and Sumy and other places.
But here, no one is giving peace a chance. Not yet, anyway. We came across this throng of eager men, young and old, doing the paperwork of war, signing up to get their guns before heading to the front. For them, this fight is personal.
I placed my family in a more safe place.
But you will stay here to defend Lviv. Other places?
Just now, yes, here, and I don't know what will be tomorrow.
But this is today's collection of grim postcards from the abyss. Here's 7 civilians killed in one strike this afternoon, including 2 children. Unimaginable a week ago, now unforgettable. Now, about 500 miles to the south from where I am, people in the city of Odessa are anticipating an imminent attack. The strategically vital port on the Black Sea coast will now be a target for Russian forces. They control the area near the city on the west side of the Dnieper River. With Kherson and Mariupol occupied, Russia has almost all the southern and eastern borders of Ukraine encircled. Ground-based Russian units are now likely to attempt to reach Odessa. And with the Russian Black Sea Fleet positioned off the coast, there's also fear of an amphibious landing. This would mean that Russia controls all of Ukraine's main points of access to the sea. Well, our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, and her team reached the city this afternoon. Lindsay.
Matt, we spent about 8 hours on the road today coming from the Moldovan border. To begin with, we were passing great long queues of traffic. Cars coming from Kharkiv, which is still being shelled, and Zaporizhia, that's the place where that nuclear power plant is that you've just been reporting on. Then finally we made it into Odessa, and of course there were cars going in the opposite direction from us. Now, it's pretty deathly quiet here. One of the most extraordinary things in Odessa was just seeing signs, with sandbags and signs saying mines and great rocks on the road, trying to block any kind of amphibious landing. And that's because lurking just over the horizon are a flotilla of Russian warships. Now, these warships have on them tanks, attack helicopters, and marines. I understand that there'll be about 1,500 to 2,000 marines, but that isn't enough to take a city of 1 million people, which is why we're expecting them to come in on land as well. And the Ukrainians do plan to defend us. They have their artillery and they are in place. But this is a desperately important strategic place for both the Ukrainians and the Russians.
Not just strategically important, Lindsay, but also culturally highly significant, isn't it?
Oh, very much. I mean, this is a beautiful city, full of 19th century architecture. There's a wonderful ornate opera house. It has a long Jewish tradition. It was a free-port, an entrepot in the 19th century. People come here. It's a tourist spot. It's got a big artist colony here. But, it has a great Russian history. And I think this is tremendously important. Most people here speak Russian. And the last time I was here in 2014, that was when the Russians were annexing Crimea and separating off the Donbass from the rest of Ukraine. Quite a few people I met here did support the Russians. They said, yeah, well, they were feeling a bit Russian as well as Ukrainian. It's very different now. I was talking to a woman this afternoon she was a Russian speaker, and she said, they say they're coming here to protect us. Protect us from what? We're just fine. And that, of course, is the mood that we found all over Ukraine. But the fear is that there will be a battle here in Odessa.
Lindsay and your team, look after yourselves. Thanks very much indeed. Well, yesterday we showed you that very moving footage of the Ukrainian parliament singing the national anthem as they gathered in person to work in defiance of the invasion. Well, earlier I spoke to one of the MPs who was there yesterday, Lesia Martinenko, and I started by asking her whether she and her colleagues felt in danger.
Well, we all knew what we were doing. It is long known that the building of the Parliament of Ukraine and of the whole governmental quarter is the #1 target of the Russian aviation and the Russian army. But nevertheless, it was important for us to turn up to work yesterday and to vote on all of the laws that are necessary for our military to be doing a much better job at protecting Ukrainians and Ukraine. And we did just that, our duty and our responsibility to the people of Ukraine. And if you ask me about emotions, they were running high yesterday. The singing of the national anthem was the most powerful moment in, I think, the whole history of the Parliament of Ukraine.
When you look at the level of destruction, courtesy of the Russian army every day, when you look at the fact that there are towns increasingly now under Russian occupation, this is going to be a marathon, isn't it? It's going to be a very, very long haul that could end in defeat.
I don't accept that line of thinking, and no Ukrainian accepts that line of thinking. We only allow positive thoughts of victory and the fact that Ukraine will prevail, and we would like to trust the fact that our partners, our allies in the international community will stand with us, not just on hashtags on Twitter and other social media, but will actually stand with us and stand up to the biggest authoritarian power in the world.
So how disappointed were you today by NATO's decision to rule out enforcing a no-fly zone?
With that decision, NATO just signed the death sentence to the very concept of sovereign states and of independent states in the world, because to just blatantly write Ukraine off as, we cannot introduce a no-fly zone because that would mean war with Russia. I'm sorry, that's not an excuse. Russia is already at war with the world. Russia
No,
has
they're at
every
war with
rule
Ukraine,
in the
stupid.
international law book. The sanctions which have been applied, okay, they are big, they will have consequences in the long term,
Dummy.
but they are not nearly enough to stop them moving into Ukraine and invading Ukraine, infesting Ukraine like vermin, which is what they are doing literally like right now, because they
They're gonna
have
so kill World War III.
one goal and one goal only, and their goal is to eradicate Ukraine from the face of the earth, to erase Ukrainians from the history of the earth. That is called genocide, if I'm not mistaken, under international law.
So the British government is one of many governments in the West that prides itself now on doing a lot, on sanctions, sending weapons to Ukraine. What do you say directly to our Prime Minister Boris Johnson?
He's doing a lot, and we are grateful for the weapons we are getting and the sanctions that Russia is getting, but that is not nearly enough. When you know that Vladimir Putin, a power-crazed leader, has said that Ukraine has no right to exist, then you know that no peace talks with him are possible. So we call now on the UK to provide that backup. And if that doesn't happen, my belief is that the Prime Minister of the UK and all of the government of the UK are going to fail not Ukraine and not the 44 million Ukrainians, half of them being women and children, but they are going to fail the British people. Why? Because Russia today is posing a threat to humanity as a whole, because they are targeting not just hospitals and schools and kindergartens, they are targeting nuclear power stations across Ukraine, and we have 5 of those.
Although they're not saying this publicly, the calculation is that if they get more involved, if NATO soldiers, including British ones, get involved against Russian soldiers, that would be risking World War III, and they don't want to risk that.
They are already in World War III. The world
No.
is already in World
No,
War
we're
III.
not.
It is time to put away the rose-colored glasses and to just admit to it.
No.
And it would be better to do it earlier rather than later, when the civilian
No.
casualties run by the thousands,
No, I want my
not
kids to
by the
live,
million.
bitch.
And when the refugees run by 1
Get the
million,
fuck
not
outta
by
here.
tens of millions.
It's Ukraine against
And
Russia.
later we'll be
I hate
talking to a
people like
nuclear
that, man.
security expert
It's already
at
World War
Harvard about the
III.
attack on that plant.
Fucking people from Iraq want to be like, it's already World War III.
Now, more than 500 international students in Ukraine have found themselves trapped inside a war zone in the country's northeast, more than 500 miles from the only real way out over the western border with Poland.
The majority of these people got to be
Many
from
say they were
Ukraine. They
advised to
can't
stay
be
in
Russian,
the city
man.
as soon
'Cause,
as
I
their
mean,
own safety.
I don't.
Then heavy
A
shelling
Russian
began.
would, like,
Dangerous
you know,
reports.
wouldn't be begging for help.
The sound of Sumy, an explosion in the distance as Russia's war with Ukraine closes in
What
on
kind
the
of
city.
bullshit is this?
This
Are you gonna
town,
put the
not
whole
far
world
away,
at
came
risk?
under
World
attack
War
on
III with the
Monday.
whole
The mayor
fucking.
said
Are you
Russian
crazy?
shelling killed 6 people.
You know how many millions of people
Meanwhile,
would
in
die?
Sumy itself, international
Putin
students
says,
advised
okay,
by the
well,
university
I'm gonna
to
blow
stay
everybody
put,
up.
cram into bunkers when the sirens
NATO
go on.
represents all of
In the
us.
northeast of Ukraine, Sumy is a city with
We
few
can't.
routes out. East, just over an hour's drive, is Russia.
Can't do
And
that.
areas on the Ukraine side of the border are now under Russian control. The British
Ah.
embassy has told students to try to make it to Ukraine's western borders,
Okay.
but the safety of Poland or Slovakia is more than 500 miles away, a 12-hour drive. A frightening and difficult journey. These pictures were filmed a few days ago by a resident fleeing by car, but few of the students have cars, and buses and trains out of Sumy are suspended. The students are trapped, and conditions are grim.
The water in the pipe is really dirty, and we are supposed to drink this water because we don't have any water supply.
They've been resorting to collecting snow, which they boil to make drinks and prepare
Oh,
meals.
my Lord. And they don't let the Indian people out.
They're
And
frightened.
the
They've
African
got
people.
no idea how to
Oh.
escape the dangerous trap they're in.
Oh my God.
Well, earlier I spoke to a British medical student who's trapped in Sumy, and I began by asking him to describe his current situation.
We were just in the bunkers in the morning, and we just came back to our room. We were just told for like a few hours you can come back and have something to eat, or just chill out for a while, try to get some rest. But we are not able to because there is no water and electricity is being off. We are just like struggling to try to get to toilets or try to cook something. There's literally no water to drink, nor washing room or restroom, any sort. And I'm not sure what's going to happen to us at all.
How did you end up trapped? Because many people obviously have tried to flee.
Let's see what he
Did
says.
you and your friends
Okay.
try to leave?
We tried to spoke to some taxi drivers and some bus drivers, but we were just told by them that it's actually impossible because all the roads and the bridges that connects to different cities are being bombarded and destroyed. And we were told to just take a walk, but we are unable because it's snowing right now and it's -4. So we are not even able to make a way at all. We've been contacted with every sort of embassy. We tried to contact with the British embassy, and British embassy basically just told us that, I'm sorry, we don't know what to do. They just told us that if you somehow manage to make it to the western borders, let us know or call us. So, and since then, we are just panicking too much.
So an offer of help if you can make it to the border, but no
Yeah.
advice or help to get there.
Literally none.
And I just wonder how you're all coping.
We can't eat any sort of meals. If we do, then there's literally no water for restrooms at all. And they're just struggling with the weather. There's no water, no electricity. Like right now, I'm thankful that I had a power bank and I'm able to talk to you because of some charge that I have left on my phone. But there are so many people, they're not even trying or cannot talk to their parents back at home. And that's what really panicking us more, because the parents, they're just crying every time you call, and they're calling us every 20 minutes, you know. And the Wi-Fi is gone, electricity, literally everything is gone.
Have you reached out to anyone else for help? I mean, the Ukrainian authorities, many of you are from India originally. Have you tried reaching the Indian
Yeah.
authorities? Have they been any more helpful?
We did. We tried to contact the Indian embassy. They've been told that there will be some sort of evacuation measures that are going to be taken. But up until now, there hasn't been anything at all. They've just been collecting our names, our passport, but there's literally been nothing in the border with Russia. It's 50 kilometers max that Russians can come anytime. But we are being told to travel almost 1,200 kilometers away from Sumy, all the way to Romania or the other end of Ukraine. And I'm not sure how we will manage to do that because there is no trains, there is no buses, there is no sorts of transportation that can help us or take us to different parts of Ukraine.
And how many of you are there trapped in that building at the moment?
Actually, there's a different, we don't know exactly, to be honest. There are more than 4 hostels and there are people, some people are staying in the flats. But up till now, we've been gathered that altogether foreigners are around 1,000 plus. But we don't know who is here and who is not here. Because in this building that we are in, we've been told to stay in the basement and not try to go out at all.
And I just wonder how you feel and how the others feel. You're British, you have a British passport. How you feel with the level of support you've been given at the moment?
We don't feel like any sort of help is being told to us or given to us. I just really request that the government or someone just tries to get, at least if you're gonna do some sort of war, do it, but at least just try to get out the people who we just came here to study for medicine. We're just hoping that someday we'll just become some sort of good doctor so that we can help others.
You must be terrified.
At some point, they're just given up, literally. We don't know what to do. You can see that I'm really hurt. It really gets to people. I'm really struggling. We really all are struggling. So I just really hope, I request to anyone who is out there who can help us, just try to get us out, even little by little. I really pray that some sort of help is coming on the way. I really do.
So your message to the British government, please come and help us.
Please, we are trapped. We are literally trapped. We don't know where to go. We don't know what to do.
Abro, we will hope that something good happens in the next couple of days and you can get out. We will keep in touch with you. But for now, thanks very much for talking to us. Well, the Foreign Office said the safety of British nationals was a top priority, with specialist teams on hand in neighbouring countries, adding that from February the 11th, Britons have been advised to leave Ukraine immediately if they judged that it was safe to do so. Now, the Russian parliament has passed a new law imposing a jail term of up to 15 years for spreading what they described as intentionally fake news about the military, which could discredit the armed forces. There are also fines for anyone publicly calling for sanctions against Moscow. Our chief correspondent Alex Thompson is in Moscow, where he also has to operate under those new measures. Alex.
Yes, well, to win a war, I guess you have to sell a war and sell the message. And today, very much a day in which here in Russia, in Moscow, and beyond, the propaganda strategy is really interwoven, I suppose, with things happening on the battlefield itself. One important message to tell you first off, in the last couple of hours, Facebook has been completely shut down here in Russia. 2 important messages from the Russian government, from the Kremlin, and indeed from their military today. A Russian diplomat has said this afternoon categorical denials that Russia has used any kind of munitions at all with regard to firing on any nuclear power stations in Ukraine. Moreover, an interesting message from the spokesman of the Defense Ministry this afternoon. He again brought the media and the propaganda message into what is happening in Ukraine. He said that there's a big provocation going on, and it's in Kharkiv, where he accused the Ukrainian forces of planting multiple rocket launch systems in civilian areas. He named names, districts, he named streets. He said the point being, they would then fire those systems on Russian forces, the Russians would respond. Video of those munitions going in and being fired in civilian areas would be supplied to Western journalists in Kharkiv and used as evidence, as he put it, to promote the lie that Russia is using such munitions in civilian areas. So goes the propaganda on and around what is happening in Ukraine. Here in Moscow, a slew of global media organizations essentially ceasing to function across this country. Indeed, the BBC has suspended all its journalistic operations here for the time being. The BBC set up shop here in 1963. It's the first time they've decided to do that. It is the law. Talking about invasion or war in Ukraine is now a criminal offence because it is fake news. we must talk about the special military operation, or face up to 15 years in prison. So the Russian parliament voted today 401 MPs in favour, none against, none abstaining.
Начиная там, от Инстаграма, заканчивая другими, находятся в Соединенных Штатах Америки. Понятно, их используют как оружие.
Yeah, that's good. Report the war and don't report anything else, because too many fake reports out there.
Websites of 5 global media organisations like Deutsche Welle and BBC were blocked this morning for hosting, quote, false information about Russian military action in Ukraine. The Moscow office of one of Russia's leading human rights groups, Memorial, raided by police this morning.
То мне угрожали применить силу, если я не пропущу. То есть это уровень законности на сегодняшний день в столице России.
They weren't alone. At least one other human rights organisation had similar visitors. And from the leader today, a mood swing. After days of snarling threats, suddenly he seems to be offering the world conciliation.
Мы всегда об этом говорили. Нет никаких недобрых намерений в отношении наших соседей. И им бы посоветовал тоже не нагнетать ситуацию, не вводить никаких ограничений. Мы все свои обязательства выполняем и будем выполнять дальше.
And then, this afternoon, a dramatic moment in Russia's upper house of parliament. A senator claimed that from 100-strong unit of conscripted soldiers being withdrawn from Ukraine, only 4 had survived. Of course, the Kremlin would probably classify this claim as fake news.
Из роты 100 человек, живых осталось 4. Я в тот же день, накануне.
In Red Square, the mood is, well, escapist. The last days of the Christmas fair, still offering a frosty day out for tourists. Or memories of a special wedding day, perhaps. But day by day, hour by hour, this vast country ever more frozen out from humanity's global economic enterprise by the sanctions.
In the land where there is no war, where there is no invasion, the show must go on. But normality can only run so far across Russia.
Oh, so much damn war. People love to fight, boy.
And out on the streets all the while, the behemoth of state security grinds down on
don't make it a World War III.
Overnight, at least 300 more people
Where they're
arrested in more
sending
than 20
freaking
cities,
nuclear
or,
weapons
as
all
we must
over the
say,
world.
undermining the special military operation in Ukraine
Then we're in trouble.
unofficial
And it
and
can
illegal
happen.
ways.
It can happen.
The jailed opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, has called for another protest across Russian cities scheduled for 2 o'clock
Russia has
tomorrow
more nuclear
afternoon.
weapons than the United
It will be, of
States.
course, more people merely spreading fake news on the special military operation in Ukraine.
Alex Thompson reporting there from Moscow. Well, we've managed to get in touch with someone inside Russia. We're not using their name for their own safety, as she told us that it was not safe to be identified on British television.
Bullshit.
She began by describing how she was feeling.
I am terrified of what is happening. Like, at this point, we are mostly protesting so just that we can look at ourselves in the mirror, knowing that we will at least state our position and don't just sit in silence. There is no dependable data on political views of Russian as a whole. Like, we have no way to understand if most of them actually support Putin, or they just say it because they are scared. If they answer something wrong, they will be sent to prison. I'd love to see oligarchs losing their money and their power. But also I feel like what the West is doing right now is pushing Russia into isolation and poverty, and that kind of, I don't know, is in a way counterproductive. If there will be like democratic elections in the nearest future, well, I don't know. I hope for that, but I can really see no way of this happening right now.
Well, there are reports from Russia that people have been packing onto the only open train route from Russia into the Finnish capital Helsinki. Rail operators say that passenger numbers have soared and all train services are full for the next few days. Some of those leaving worried the border might close, others that the economic situation will become too difficult to stay.
I'm Russian, but I'm 1/4 Ukrainian. My grandfather is Ukrainian, and I really support Ukraine in this situation, and I'm fully 100% on the side of Ukraine. And it's horrible for us. For all Russian people, it's horrible. You know, I've been crying for 2 days because it's my personal tragedy as well.
And we have also spoken to one man who also didn't want to be named, who along with his family has now fled Russia. I started by asking where he's managed to get to so far.
Currently, my family and I, we're in Finland. We are in a holiday house we've had bought about 10 to 12 years ago. And we used to go there with our family or friends of family, but now we're staying here and using it as a sort of base of operations, or as you can say, a safe haven.
And when you talk about a safe haven, why do you no longer feel safe in your own country?
We do fear conscription, essentially, which is something that can happen at any time. And because the government, well, they're being quite opaque and not very clandestine with what they're intending to do, and they did start a war.
I mean, there had been this rumour that they had intended to bring in martial law, which may well bring with it conscription. They are denying that. They're saying that that is simply not true.
Yes, but the government also said there would be no invasion, and the government has gone as far as to say that this is not a war, this is in fact a special military operation. That leaves some questions as to whether they are correct and as to whether they're being truthful.
I mean, I just wonder, as a young man, you're 20, how much of a
Yes.
fear was that issue of conscription?
To fight in a war such as this, which is a heinous war, to fight against people I might well know, it's horrible, and we had no say in this, and honestly, it's not something that should have happened. And conscription is known for not being exactly concerned with the lives of its soldiers.
And yet, Vladimir Putin has said this is about bringing together all Russians.
Invading a country and, first of all, blatantly disregarding what the other side says, blatantly disregarding the diplomatic, you can say, side of Ukraine, and continuously claiming that there are no civilian losses, no significant civilian losses, that civilians are not being targeted, that civilian houses are not being targeted, while there are constantly videos of things happening, of houses being hit with rockets, and claiming all of those videos are somehow faked by the Ukrainian government. I think it's quite a heinous thing to do.
In many ways, you're fortunate, your family is fortunate to have somewhere to go. Do you worry about the people you've left behind, the friends you've left behind?
Surely my family is worried about everyone involved in the conflict. We're worried about our friends, both in Ukraine, who are facing a war, and they don't know if they'll essentially live to see another day. But we're also very worried about our friends back at home. And I've asked a few of my friends, the friends I've known for years, if they can leave or if they have plans on leaving. And their response is, we don't know how.
Thank you so much for talking to us today. Thank you. So what's the Western military assessment of Russia's strategy and tactics on the ground? Well, with me now is Paul McNamara. Paul.
Well, the view of Western officials I've been hearing from today is that the war Russia is fighting is not the war that Russia trained for. In plain speaking, a week in, it's not going to plan. So the plan was a short, sharp, shock invasion of Ukraine, quick rollover of Ukrainian forces. And clearly, that hasn't happened. And the best illustration of this is the 40-mile military convoy stuck outside Kyiv. Satellites took these images at the beginning of the week. It's barely moved since then. And people were starting to question, well, is that all part of the Russian plan? The Western view, no, it is not part of the plan. They've had massive logistical problems. the Ukrainians blew up a key bridge, and according to a senior US defense official, that convoy has been attacked a number of times by Ukrainian forces. One other interesting thing, Western officials say that 3 senior Russian commanders have been killed. One of them is this man, Major General Andrei Sukhuyevsky. But look, men this senior are usually nowhere near the front lines, let alone close enough to be shot by an enemy sniper. The Western assessment is that because operations have not been going well, they've had to go further forward, and the quote is, commanders are trying to impose their own personality on the battlefield. Evidently that comes with more dangers.
So what are the problems that Russia is facing?
Well, there's a few. So the first one is that in the first 24 hours, Russia didn't take out Ukraine's air defences. So Russian planes can be shot out of the sky. Secondly, they've got logistical and equipment problems because Russian military kit hasn't been maintained well enough. That's what the officials say. And the longer that this war continues without any significant changes, the more apparent those failures will be.
So is this good news for Ukraine then?
No, so the officials we heard from were really worried about drawing any conclusions too early. Of more concern, because of all these failures that we've seen a reversion to like an old school Russian military doctrine of bombardment. So we've had more indiscriminate fire, which means more civilian casualties. A high number of those in the last 24 hours. The most worrying, of course, an attack on a nuclear power plant. The Western view of an attack on a nuclear power plant, quote, it's unprecedented and highlights recklessness of Russian forces in Ukraine.
Thanks very much, Paul. Back to Matt.
Thanks, Jackie. Well, we all have to talk about the nuclear stuff more than we ever thought we would. Joining me now for that is from Cambridge, Massachusetts, Mariana Bujan. She's a research associate with the project on managing the atom, there's a title, at Harvard University, and this focuses on the future of nuclear weapons, nuclear energy, and disarmament. Thank you so much for coming on the program, Mariana. I mean, I thought I'd never be asking this question, but I'll ask it. What is the danger of a major catastrophe when a nuclear reactor is caught up in artillery fire like we saw last night?
Well, to be honest, we really don't know. This is, as has been said just before, this unprecedented. We have not had an attack, a military attack on a nuclear reactor. And just to remind, in 2009, in 2009, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has unanimously adopted a decision that an attack or even a threat of military attack on a civilian nuclear facility constitutes a breach of UN Charter. It constitutes a violation of international law. So that just tells you how far the Russian military, under the command of its leaders, is prepared to go to breach the rules of engagement in a conflict. One sort of silver lining in this situation is that the security and safety of nuclear power plants have been constantly upgraded, especially following some of the worst accidents on nuclear power plants, such as Chernobyl and such as Fukushima Daiichi 11 years ago. So it's not exactly very easy to cause a major release of radioactive material into the atmosphere, but it's certainly not impossible amid a war.
Right, but they're not built, are they, to withstand an artillery attack? They're built to be secure.
They're built for earthquakes. What are you, crazy?
Trying to destroy them.
Exactly. There's just so much they can withstand. Each nuclear reactor is covered by this rather robust containment chamber. So it's a reinforced concrete type of structure that is designed to withstand certain impact from the outside and to contain the radioactive release should there be, an explosion or some kind of a nuclear malfunction or event inside the reactor. However, none of these structures were designed to withstand sustained artillery fire, missile fire, bombs of various yields. We really, in a war, there could be even inadvertent things right? The shelling we saw yesterday was very specifically targeted at a nuclear power plant, but there are missiles flying all over the place. And we certainly can have no confidence that these structures could withstand. However, even if a confinement chamber is breached, it does not necessarily mean that there will be a radioactive release. There has to be first a problem with the core, with the reactor core, in order for that to happen.
Just briefly, on nuclear weapons unleashed by Russia, which is something that Vladimir Putin has threatened, what is the command and control structure that he would have to go to in order to press the red button?
So we have to keep in mind that there's two categories of weapons, nuclear weapons that Russia has at its disposal. One part is the strategic nuclear deterrent forces, the ones that he had put on higher, not exactly on higher level of alert, but higher combat readiness status of sorts. That is not really enormously concerning for Western military observers. It's not a rise in an alert status. Rather, it has been interpreted as a signal, as a communication to the West that do not get involved. We are a nuclear power. So it was the flexing of this nuclear muscle. But Russia also possesses a huge arsenal of non-strategic nuclear weapons. Those are smaller yield, shorter range weapons that are designed for so-called regional deterrence. And the scenarios, if one could think of a scenario for nuclear use, the scenarios for those are if Russia is threatened on its own territory, it looks like the regime might fall. If this is the last resort, Russia might use this to de-escalate a conventional war that it is losing. However, we really don't know how truthful to their doctrine Russians are prepared to be.
And we don't want to find out. We've got to leave it there. Thank you very much for that rather sobering assessment. Mariana Bujin, thank you very much.
That's right, we don't want to find out. Hell no. That's what happens when you have women, man. Well, let's take a chance. Let's really know.
Words nuclear and war scare you, you're not alone, because the world is on edge right now with Russia taking over Europe's biggest nuclear power plant. And the Secretary of State overseas saying the stability of Europe hangs in the balance right now. Just ahead, the heartbreaking video we're getting from a train station in Kyiv as Ukrainians try to get to safety. Plus, the ones who are coming to the U.S. will get temporary protected status. But for the thousands who are not from European countries, it's not as easy. We take a spotlight on how this is putting refugee policies under the microscope here. And with Vladimir Putin threatening to
take a chance and
reporters
press the
in prison
button
for spreading fake news, quote unquote, about his war, one Republican senator is saying, just take this guy out. He does not meet on a date. More on the pushback Lindsey Graham is getting, including from some unlikely sources. We'll also tell you about a story that is giving Gone Girl, with a California woman in court today for apparently making up her own kidnapping, while prosecutors now think those bruises she gave herself. And in the first sign of a return to normal, maybe in the sports world, the NFL plans to drop all of its COVID protocols for the season coming up. So is this the right move? We're getting into it later in our show. Hey, I'm Hallie. And tonight, the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine is getting worse, with another 200,000 people leaving the country in just the last 24 hours. And the UN now saying the total could end up being about a quarter of Ukraine's population. Take a look. This is Kyiv, Ukraine's capital. You can see people trying to get out. Look at that baby in a car seat being lifted above the crowd. They try to keep that kid safe. People crowding into these trains, kids crying. There is a sense of panic here over the inevitable arrival of Russia's military. Even though a senior U.S. defense official says they haven't gotten any closer to Kyiv in the last 24 hours. But that's not to say the Russian troops are not advancing elsewhere. They are. Secretary of State Tony Blinken in Brussels today, accusing Russia of using more and more brutal methods against civilians.
I think the terrible expectation is that the suffering we've already seen is likely to get worse before it gets better for as long as Russia pursues these methods.
That's usually
And right
how
as we
it
were coming
is.
on the air, we found out that the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, might be Zooming with senators tomorrow. They've been invited for that session, a day after what he called a night that could stop history, when Russia took over a nuclear power plant by force. A fire started in the plant, so in the middle, if you're looking at your screen, that's what you're seeing right in the center there. Ukraine says 3 people died in this attack. The Pentagon says there's no evidence that any radioactive material, right, any of the bad stuff, if you will, leaked during this thing, but the Defense Department spokesperson was very clear about just how urgent that situation is. Watch.
Attacking a nuclear power plant is exceedingly dangerous and could have visited a lot more damage and destruction to the people of Ukraine, to the and perhaps even to neighboring countries.
But I mean, think about it. But those are locations that you want to take over.
Where you are.
Right?
You are in the part of the country that is basically
Like,
closer
what the
to
fuck? I
further
mean,
away from Russia,
okay,
right?
all this
So when you pull
army,
up a plant, pull
let's
up a
take
map
over
here
the
where some of these
plant.
other nuclear plants
What do you
are.
think is going to happen?
Apparently, Russia, according to the UN, is about 20 miles away from the second
Control
biggest
the
power
light,
plant,
you
nuclear power
control the
plant in Ukraine.
city.
You can see where these power plants are on this image in comparison to those big cities, Matt. I mean, this is, you know, we said it a second ago, we heard it from the Pentagon, an urgent situation.
Yeah, I mean, Ukraine relies for more than half of its energy or its electricity on nuclear power. So that's an urgent situation. There's 4 main nuclear power plants in Ukraine, 15 different reactors. But, you know, whether or not we're going to start to see Russia targeting them, I think we can't make that leap and say that Russia actually targeted Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. That would be maybe even assigning recklessness to their motives. Clearly, they didn't want to have a nuclear disaster that, if it were to ignite, it would spill over the borders into their own country, even if we assign this total selfishness to the Russians. It just doesn't make sense in terms of motive.
That's right.
Talk to me
It
about what we heard
doesn't
from the
make
NATO
sense. That's
Secretary
why it
General,
makes
who
more
is
sense
saying that
what
Russia is using so-called
was
cluster
said that
bombs to kill Ukrainian civilians.
the Ukraine attacked them. Well,
This is
they
brutality.
were.
This is inhumane.
Well, they took over
This is
the.
violating international law.
They took it
So it's
over.
brutality, it's inhumane, it's violating international law. Ukraine is all but begging, as you know, for a no-fly zone. Seems to be a non-starter, right, with the West, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, a no-fly zone would essentially mean that the NATO countries and the U.S. would have to actually engage in a firefight with Russian Air Force. That would be really tough. I mean, you're talking about essentially American or NATO forces shooting down Russian jets. So that's kind of a non-starter for the
World War
West, which
III.
has already said that it's not going to be engaged in that kind of thing. You know, that's going to be a tough one. That's a big ask, and the Ukrainians have been asking for that for quite a while. But when it comes to these cluster bombs, you know, this is a big issue
Protect
right now.
your fucking
Whether
way
or
of
not this
life.
is against international law, as we constantly are hearing, well, it's against some treaties. Russia's not a party to the treaty that
And we
forbids the use
die.
of cluster bombs. And by the way, Hallie,
Doesn't
neither
work
is
that
the
way.
U.S. The U.S. hasn't used cluster bombs for a couple of decades. They have used them fairly recently. So it's not something that isn't in the U.S. arsenal. The Russians have used them before. They used them in Syria. It's a nasty weapon, but we're kind of painting ourselves, you know, we could end up with egg on our face.
That's
The
right.
US uses
We've
these
done it in
weapons and
Iraq.
used them in the
Yep,
past,
Israel
not
have done it.
recently. But recently enough where it's kind of uncomfortable for us to start throwing accusations at someone like,
accusations, that's
like
right.
Russia and saying, don't use these weapons. 110 countries throughout the world forbid the use of cluster munitions. The US and Russia aren't part of that, so.
You know, one of the things we mentioned as we're coming on the air, Matt, just, you know, popping into, I know your email, mine, is NBC News confirming that senators have been invited to a briefing now with President Zelensky tomorrow. Obviously virtual, of course. This is going to be, you know, over Zoom or something similar. He's been delivering messages to the Ukrainian people and frankly to the rest of the world. I want to play the most recent one or a part of it. Watch.
I would like to call upon you not to be silent. If Ukraine will not stand, Europe will not stand.
No.
What's the sense of morale
that's
that you're feeling right now, that you're getting right now as you're in Ukraine, as you're talking to people there?
Yeah, morale was sky high a couple days ago, but I gotta say, I really don't see this maintaining itself. This has always been Russia's fight to lose. The fact of the matter is, the Ukrainians surprised and impressed the world with the first week, the first days of their fight against the Russians. A vastly powerful force, overwhelming in its strength. But now we're starting to see the Russians moving up the Dnieper River from the south. That Zaporizhzhia plant, that's one of the main targets that they've managed to take in just the last 24 hours. Look, I mean, this is still Russia's fight to lose. Even if the Ukrainians have surprised and impressed the world, as I just said, this could change at any minute, and it could change within the next hours or days. Hallie?
Matt Bradley, live for us there in Lviv. Matt, it's really great to see you there reporting on the ground. As always, stay safe. Thank you. Here's the thing, right? If you were in Russia right now, there's a better than not chance that you don't know anything about what we just mentioned, because this new law pushed by Vladimir Putin threatens to throw any journalist behind bars for 15 years for spreading so-called false information about the war in Ukraine. And let's be clear, that just means stuff that Putin doesn't like, right? This is him. He was talking with top advisors there in Russia today.
No, because you'll
I've
have
already
your
seen
damn
some of the
court
reaction
and
from the
if it's
international community. The BBC has pulled out its journalists
fake.
from Russia for safety reasons. And Russia's last big independent paper says it's going to delete all of its content about war. Why? So it doesn't get prosecuted. Then you've got some of the reaction here at home.
If it's fake,
Right? And
then
a kind of political
you're
curveball
guilty.
thrown by
You
Republican
go to
Senator
court and
Lindsey
it finds
Graham,
out that
who is
it
absolutely
was
not
fake,
backing away from his comments that the Russian people should, in
then
his
you're
words,
wrong. But if
take out
your
Vladimir
report is
Putin.
true, then you walk away.
The Putin nightmare, the Putin killing machine.
I think
needs to
we need
end.
that in America
And I'm
because
not calling
so
for
much
troops on the
fake
ground
stuff.
of the Ukraine. I'm not calling for an invasion of Russia by the West or the United States. But I am calling for the good people of Russia to stand up and end this sooner rather than later.
And that's not even the most sort of explosive piece of what we heard from Senator Lindsey Graham, who overnight had said, referencing Brutus, that the Russian people should stand up and take out the president of Russia. His spokesperson said he also meant a coup. But again, Graham's not backing away from this. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki has responded. We're going to get to that in a second. But you have some pushback to Graham from even members of his own party, right? Democrats pushing back, but even some Republicans, too, are calling this a bad idea, saying his comments are not helpful because the world is watching. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Republican congresswoman, no stranger to controversy herself, says what Graham is saying is dangerous and unhinged. And of course, you know Russia had something to say about it, too. Its press secretary for the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, saying, quote, this is his quote, not everyone manages to maintain sobriety, I would even say sanity, and many lose their minds. Joining me now is Leanne Caldwell on Capitol Hill. And Leanne, here's why this matters, right? Because Putin is on defense right now. The world, most of the rest of the world is united against what he's doing in Ukraine. And the Russians, his team basically, has been eager to look for any reason to claim persecution by the Americans, right? So there is a risk that what Lindsey Graham is saying now becomes propaganda played over and over again in Moscow.
Yeah, it could be weaponized in Russia. And we all know that there's a lot of propaganda, as you just mentioned, happening in Russia right now. And so this is actually perhaps real news that they would be able to play to the Russian people to, you know, as you mentioned at the top of the show, people could get up to 15 years in prison for based on what they are reporting. Now, this is coming from the Russian state, and yeah, this could give fuel to the fire because we know that the people in Russia, they doesn't have a lot of support for this. There's been anecdotal reports of the fact that people did not think that there was actually going to be a war in Ukraine. And so, yeah, this could be something that Putin uses to his advantage for the public in Russia.
Here's how the White House press secretary, I alluded to this moment, I said we'd play it, so let's do it. Here's how she responded when she was asked about this earlier today. Not too long ago, actually. Watch.
That is not the position of the United States government, and certainly not a statement you'd hear come from the mouth of anybody working in this administration.
So clearly pushback from Democrats in the White House. Pushback, though, on the other side from, for example, Republican senator, fellow senator of Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, who called this, and I'm paraphrasing, an extraordinarily bad idea, basically, to suggest, imply the assassination of another sitting head of state at this extremely tense and volatile moment.
Yeah, the criticism is coming from the left, the right, the far right, like you mentioned, Marjorie Taylor Greene, although I don't think that her opinion really matters much. And these sorts of discussions, serious discussions. But what, Senator Cruz
I like
said, what
Lindsey Graham,
needs to
but
happen instead of
he messed
taking
up
out
there.
the leader of another country is that the United States needs to continue very tough sanctions against Russia, needs to arm the Ukrainians, get that $10 billion that the administration asked for, approve it so that they have the humanitarian and defense capabilities that Ukraine needs. Now, that is where the discussion is focused on Capitol Hill. Senator Graham is an outlier. Of course, this is not American policy to assassinate the president of another country. But also today, Senator Graham introduced a bill or resolution supporting Putin being tried for war crimes. So, Graham has been a hawk. He's been anti-Putin for a very long time. Why he decided to come out with this position, I have no idea. But there it is, and not a lot of people support it.
Leanne Caldwell. Sounded like it is on Capitol Hill. Leanne, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Now to an NBC News exclusive that's super interesting here. And the news, as we've learned, that members of the group Anonymous, the hackers group, they're basically declaring cyber war on Russia. They claim to have targeted more than 1,500 Russian websites, including the defense ministry, including the sites of some Russian oil companies. And now, you know who they have their eye on?
This is a message to Vladimir Putin from Anonymous. Members of Anonymous have declared cyber war against your aggressive regime.
U.S. officials are saying that this started right after
Well,
Russia's
we
invasion
know
of
that
Ukraine, and right now you
Anonymous
have
is
some
from
sites in Russia that are
Ukraine,
not
then.
even accessible. While a ton of government and military records are getting basically broadcast online. Tom Costello
Yeah.
had an exclusive interview with a cybersecurity official on this, a top official. He is here in studio for the show tonight. Tom, we're so glad to have you because this is fascinating stuff. I mean, it is so interesting and super important.
Yeah, it is important, and specifically, the United States is concerned about the potential that the Russians are going to view this attack by Anonymous
right.
as an attack coming from the West, and that the Russians will retaliate against everybody. But here's a quick list of the sites, 1,500 plus sites, according to Anonymous, that they have now attacked already in Russia. They claim that they've already hit the Kremlin-controlled news agencies, including RT, the Ministry of Defense, the space agency as well, Russian oil companies like Gazprom, internet companies, and even some TV channels have also been attacked.
They've also targeted some U.S. sites too. I mean, you speak, I think, to your point, as we talked about at the top of the show with Matt Bradley, this is a volatile and extremely precarious moment. As we talked about, Leanne, the wrong word from a senator could mean a lot, right? The wrong move by an outside cyber hacking group like Anonymous could be really problematic, to say the least. You talked with Jen Easterly, exclusively a top cybersecurity official. Tell me more about what
She is the top cybersecurity official. She runs U.S. cybersecurity. Used to be known, it still is known as CISA, but they've decided too many people don't know that acronym. So now they call it cybersecurity, which is more accurate. Bottom line, she says, you at home, regardless of what kind of company you're in, big, small, and all of us need to be prepared. Here's what she said.
Everybody's at risk. I mean, at the end of the day, we live in a world that is highly digitized, highly connected. The volume, variety, and velocity of data is growing exponentially. This can happen to anyone. There is no one that is immune from potentially getting hacked. And so the simple steps that you can take as an individual, the steps that you can take as a business are incredibly important in protecting, it's in some cases an existential issue.
Yeah, to be clear, she's not only talking about the possibility of another Russian attack against the U.S. As you know, there have been many food supplies, oil supplies, you name it. She's talking about any and all cyber attacks, and yes, they are seeing an uptick right now.
So if you're watching this and you're like, great, what am I supposed to do? Tom, what are you supposed to do?
So let's go through the basics again of cybersecurity, and you should know this already. We've reported on it for years, and they haven't changed much. Never, ever click on that suspicious email or link. Tell your kids, tell your grandma, tell your employees. Use complicated passwords. I personally mix up languages. I use several languages in one password.
You fancy.
And numbers. What's that?
You're fancy, man.
Oh, yeah, well, my wife is European, so I mix them all up, mix. And then I use overseas zip codes, by the way. Okay, multi-step authentication. You should be doing that.
Yes.
Back up your computers to the cloud or to an external hard drive and keep your security software up to date. These are still the basics. This is still what they preach every single day. Follow these steps. You really will minimize your risk of being hacked.
So much focus on cyber right now. It's a great interview. It's a great scoop, and we're glad you brought it to us. Thank you, Tom.
You bet.
Appreciate it. During explosive new testimony today, you had a witness saying the accused leader of the January 6th riot, Guy Reffitt, had a gun and had zip ties when he tried to storm the building on the 6th. This is coming from a friend, right? A guy named Rocky Hardy, fellow member of that right-wing group, the Texas Three Percenters, telling the jury he and Reffitt drove to D.C. from Texas in Reffitt's car, right, his Chevy, that was loaded up with rifles, guns, ammo. He also testified that they joked about dragging House Speaker Nancy Pelosi down the steps of the U.S. Capitol. We should note, Hardy testified as part of a deal with the government that they wouldn't use his testimony against Reffitt against him. Danny Savalos joins us now. So, Danny, this is a trial that we've been covering now since really it started, right? And just to remind people, this is the one where yesterday, Reffitt's own son testified against him in this very dramatic moment. Today, you have what some observers see as pretty damning testimony from a friend, somebody who was with Guy Reffitt on the day of the insurrection. Give me your lawyer analysis here. How's this trial going for the defense and for the prosecution?
Now, well, the public is getting a
thought
look
so.
at how the
I
federal
thought very
government
much.
works. You know that buddy
did
of
I-
yours that says he'd be behind you no matter what?
Yeah, your ride
You
or
know,
die
even
friend, you know, right.
Your ride or die friend and even family members, when the federal government comes knocking, it's the rare individual that doesn't think eventually about themselves first and eventually decide to testify. So this defendant is learning very quickly and firsthand what happens when your alleged co-conspirator or even your own family member is approached by the government. Be careful, look at the bet you've made in terms of your family and your friends, and that's how quickly they will turn on you. And that's, I mean, it's really very tragic watching his son or hearing about his son testify against this defendant and how he was so concerned that he even reported him to the FBI before they went on January 6th. So it's sad all around, but this defendant is learning again firsthand how efficient the government is.
But I mean, this friend, Rocky Hardy, right? He's got this deal with the government, but could still face charges. How does that work when you have Hardy testifying to things that were done that are obviously, as we see in this trial, potentially criminally problematic?
If you have an agreement with the government, one version of that can be, hey, the stuff I talk about, that I testify about, you can't use that against me. But of course, if you're going to prosecute me, you might use all the other things, like, for example, the terabytes of video evidence of people going into the Capitol. He may be on there as well. So that's one agreement that he could have entered into with the government. It's a version of a kind of immunity. There are different kinds. Use immunity, transactional immunity. It really depends on the fit and the needs of the government in a particular situation and what defense counsel can come up with as a solution or a pathway through and as soft as landing as possible for the client.
We've said, and the brilliant and inimitable P. Williams has pointed out that while this is the first Capitol attack case to go to trial, it's not necessarily the most significant, but it is the number one, right? It is the first one. But as you're watching this, Danny, and as you're looking at it through an attorney's eyes, what does this mean in your view for other cases that would still have yet to go to trial?
I really expect the only people who don't now have a realistic view of how these cases will go might be some defendants. And as a criminal defense attorney, look, sometimes you have clients that won't see the world for what it is. They just believe against overwhelming evidence that they are innocent. And maybe some of these remaining defendants will realize that rarely in the history of criminal prosecution have we had this much video and other evidence, digital evidence, other kinds of evidence establishing where people were and what they were doing at a particular time. So some of these remaining defendants might actually watch this trial and make decisions about their own case as a result.
We've been showing, obviously, some of those pictures of Guy Reffitt. Danny, you make a good point on that. Danny Savalos, thank you. Good to see you. The Boston Marathon bomber will stay on death row after the Supreme Court today reinstated a death sentence for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, reversing a federal appeals court decision that had voided it. He's 28 years old, convicted of joining his older brother in planting and detonating 2 pressure cooker bombs at separate spots near the marathon finish line back in 2013. You might remember some of these horrific
Yeah, I
images.
remember that.
3 people were killed, hundreds of others were hurt, in some instances very
But didn't
seriously.
Here's what Justice
Didn't one of them
Clarence Thomas had die?
to say about the ruling today, that Dzhokhar Tsarnaev committed heinous crimes. The Sixth Amendment nonetheless guaranteed him a fair trial before an impartial jury. He received one. I want to bring in Pete Williams to break down this ruling for us. What did the court hang its
Let
decision
me
on?
see this here.
Well, they said the judge was right and that the Johar Tsarnaev was wrong about two
Hey,
things.
Green, what's
Tsarnaev
up, Paul?
wasn't,
How you
remember,
doing?
attacking the trial for his conviction. It was the sentencing hearing. And what his lawyer said is, the judge made a
What's up with
mistake.
you,
He
guy?
should have allowed more extensive questioning of the jurors, not only about whether they were exposed to news coverage, but in some depth about what that coverage was and what they saw and what opinions they formed. So it was the jury selection was the first part. And secondly, they said the judge improperly excluded some evidence about a completely separate crime. This was a triple murder in Waltham, Massachusetts, a couple of years before the Marathon bombing. And
over here, I'm
Johar
gonna-
Tsarnaev's older brother,
I'm gonna make this
Tamerlan,
more
was
wider.
suspected of having been the person
Yeah, I
who
still gotta
brutally
work on
murdered
the
these
eyes,
other three
yeah.
people in an apparent drug deal. Now, his lawyer said they should have been able to introduce that evidence
bring this out.
because it would have shown that Tamerlan was violent and that he had
Okay,
his
this
younger
is
brother
coming
completely
out.
under his domination, which would have reduced the
coming
criminal
out.
culpability of the
That
younger
comes
brother,
out.
Johar Tsarnaev. But the court rejected those arguments on both counts and said the evidence
That
about
comes out,
Waltham
and
was
then
very
this one.
confusing. It would have just confused the jurors.
This
It would have been sort of
goes
leading them down a
underneath
rabbit
right
hole
here.
that had nothing to do with the crime. So it was a 6-3 ruling. The three dissenters were Justices Stephen
Oh,
Breyer,
but I
Sonia
kinda
Sotomayor,
don't
and Elena Kagan.
like this.
And they
Let
said,
me
well,
lighten
other
that.
evidence was so important it should have been allowed in the trial.
Right,
No
back
member
here.
of the court thought the judge got the jury selection.
That's interesting. I hear you talk about this, Pete, and I think about people in Boston. Can I
There
be
you
honest?
go.
I remember watching you on NBC News doing live coverage of the Boston
And
Marathon
that's
bombing was
fine.
happening, and the manhunt. I mean, this was
That's fine.
hugely dramatic,
This is-
so
I
impactful, I
gotta-
think, to a lot of people 10 years ago.
This
They don't
gotta
have to
be
now go
fixed.
through another trial, right? I mean, this means something to people.
Well, there would have been if the Supreme Court had agreed with the First Circuit here, there would have been another sentencing
one,
hearing.
yeah.
Well,
Right,
if the
and this-
government decided to seek the death penalty again, and they probably would
I
have.
was gonna say, do you think there's a chance they wouldn't have?
Well, I don't. I mean, Merrick Garland, the current Attorney General, has put a moratorium on federal executions, but not a moratorium on seeking the death penalty. And remember, the Trump administration started this, the position of the government in the Supreme Court.
What you wrote?
Because the case was originally filed when Trump was still president, saying, no, he doesn't have it, he
Okay,
shouldn't get a new
you can
sentencing.
call me
And the
green,
Biden
it
administration
doesn't
continued that
matter,
same argument.
that's why
So both
my
administrations
friends
agreed
call
on
me
this. So
high
the government
school.
would have had to make a decision.
All right,
All right, are we gonna
green.
put people in Boston through this
Hope
again?
you have a lot of
We're gonna have
green.
to come and testify about.
That's
how
not a
this changed
title
their
you just
lives.
take.
Now they won't have to.
It's
do
like
that.
this
So
guy,
there's
I
a
knew
great
this
deal
guy
of
that
movement.
As we
his
talk about
name
the court
was,
case before I let you go, big stuff coming up, right? They could hand
Money,
down some decisions
money
at some
something.
point on
I
big
know.
cases
But
on
the guy was
guns, on
broke. I said,
abortion
how can you
rights,
go with a
like
name
the
like
upcoming
that?
decision by the, on Roe.
But you
of
have
course,
no
everybody's
money.
thinking about that could overturn Roe. What's the expectation? I mean, I
What
know
was
that's
this
gonna be
guy's
a million-dollar
name?
question, we don't have a crystal ball, but we're gonna get him sometime.
Money,
next week.
money
Yeah,
something.
okay.
I don't.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean, the biggies, remember, so this case today, the Tsarnaev case, and another one, they were both argued early in the term. Tsarnaev case was argued in October, the gun case was argued in November, the abortion case was argued December 1st. And big cases like that tend to come toward the end of the term. So, I mean, in theory, we're gonna get decisions again on Monday. In theory, they could happen then, but I think it's more likely that it'll be.
You'll get a
probably
job
in
soon and you'll be
So the Biden administration now is offering something called
your
temporary
own.
protected status to Ukrainians who've been living here in the U.S. without legal status. So what does
Which
this
then
mean,
you'll
right?
really
Put
be
this into
fucked.
concrete terms. It means that the roughly 30,000 Ukrainians
I
who
wish I could have stood a teenager forever,
won't have to
man.
be deported. They can stay and work for another 18 months. And while
No
some activist
bills,
groups are applauding that
nothing,
move,
play video
some are also
games.
wondering why the U.S. has not moved as fast for people here from non-European countries when they've been basically begging for this exact same status for
Enjoy
months.
your youth,
Vaughn
man.
Hilliard has the story.
Masses of people fleeing
And
Ukraine.
fuck all the young girls you can while you're young, because once you get old, if you try, they'll get you like for a pedophile.
Have fled Ukraine to neighboring countries.
You gotta,
But what
you gotta
exactly
have all
is
your
the
fun
US
now.
prepared to actually do for those fleeing Russia's persecution in their home country?
Given the bipartisan support for Ukrainians, I think this is an opportunity to actually rebuild that pipeline.
On Thursday, the U.S. granted temporary protected status to the estimated 30,000 Ukrainians
Being a
already in the
grown-up is
country,
not all that
but
great,
not
I
here
tell you.
on visas.
We will be providing temporary protected
Not all that great.
TPS to those Ukrainian nationals who are present in the United States
Well, look what's going on in Ukraine.
But the
Killing
U.S. has not
killing each
offered a
other.
special path for current Ukrainians to come to the U.S. as refugees. Instead, the U.S. has sent millions of dollars in aid, food, healthcare
You know,
supplies,
they're sending
blankets,
millions
and
of dollars of
relief
aids,
into
right?
the region.
Now, I was thinking, what happens when Russia takes over Ukraine? Like, what happens with all that money? The ex-president walks off with it? Because it's not going to be Ukraine no more. It's going to be Russia now.
Over the last 6 months, the Biden administration has flown thousands of Haitians from the U.S.'s southern border to Haiti. In fiscal year 2021, the Biden administration welcomed just 11,411 refugees.
I mean, the right thing would be
President Obama left
for him
office,
to, like,
the number into the U.S. each year,
everyone that left
110,000.
Ukraine,
By 2020, Trump had cut that number
divide the
to
money
just
with all those
15,000.
people that they
President Trump
collected.
even signing an
That
order
would be the right
suspending
thing to do.
admission of Syrian refugees into the U.S. during the country's long,
We'll see
deadly
if that's
civil
what
war.
they're going to do,
How would
but
you describe U.S. policy towards refugees in the last 20 years?
The United States had been a country that provided refugee
me see
settlements
over
to most
here.
people in the world, and that really declined.
Vaughn Hilliard is joining us now. So Vaughn, I'm glad you're here with us. You know, we heard in your report people who want the government to give
But I know you like the green
right,
because of
similar
the
relief to
weed.
non-European people from non-European countries here, Afghan patients, for example.
Right.
What is your sense, based on the reporting that you've done on this issue,
I
that
saw
the
your
needle's going to move on that front?
that
given what we
picture
just
on
saw
your
with
page.
Right. I think, Hallie, that the refugee advocates who have talked to hope that this propels the Biden administration, the agencies that largely view refugee programs within the government largely being crippled, especially over the course of the
I didn't
Trump
know you
years
was
in
a
which
farmer,
services
man.
dwindled. They hope that this helps propel those agencies and that
How long you been
effort,
farming?
to really not only take a hard look at what the U.S. can provide for Ukrainian refugees potentially, but also when we're talking about Haitian migrants, when we're talking about other individuals from Latin America here. And actually, just this afternoon, Hallie, there was breaking news in just the last couple of hours.
Yeah,
The
weed
US,
is okay.
Court
I
of
just
Appeals
that shit gets me
actually
paranoid.
ruled that there's this public health
This
federal
girl was
law,
telling me,
Title
"Oh, you
42,
just haven't
which
gotten
the
the
Biden
right stuff. You
administration
gotta
had used over the course
get
of the
the
last
stuff
year
that
to
makes
justify
you
turning away a large
creative."
number of those migrants who are
But
arriving to the
I'm
U.S.
like, I
southern
don't know what
border,
kind of weed that is.
around the pandemic, essentially claiming to minimize the spread
I
of
know
a
in
communicable
Jersey
disease here.
it's
But now with
illegal.
that
You can
ruling,
go over
which
there
makes
and
it more
buy it. They
difficult for the
have
Biden administration to turn individuals away in the
stores.
U.S. southern border, using the pandemic as a justification.
In
The
New York
hope
City, you got
is
people
that not
smoking
only
that
here with
other stuff.
potentially these Ukrainian refugees that could come to the United States, but
Then they
also
run
those
into
seeking
cars.
asylum here at the U.S.
What do you call
border,
that
that this
stuff?
process will
It's to
increase
make the
now
house
that,
smell good.
now that this is a greater focus for the American public.
That's crazy.
Thank you. I am sure you
I
have
mean,
noticed
I've
prices
had
are
that
up.
shit always in
And
my
if you live
house
in
in
LA,
the center
oof, look at
table. I
this
never
number.
thought
The
about
price for
smoking it.
premium,
Never thought about
$7.25 a gallon.
that had to
Regular
be
is $6.65.
some real stupid dude. Like, let me try to smoke this. This shit look like
Gas in
weed.
9 states is on
I ain't
average
got no
higher than
weed,
$4
but
a gallon.
that looks like
Since
weed.
just Wednesday, the average is up 18
I'll
cents.
smoke it.
Rewind to last week in the Ukraine invasion, up 29 cents since then. These are the biggest hikes of these kinds since Hurricane Katrina back in 2005. So why
That had to be
are
a
they happening?
stupid
What is
person.
behind
My
this?
God.
We're going to explain. It seems like every day it gets a
Ever
little more
think that they
expensive to
could
top
smoke
off the
that
tank.
shit?
It's usually like, oh, $30. Yeah, no, it was definitely like 45.
But why? It all has to do with the basic economic concept, supply and demand. With the
Supply
Russian
and
invasion of
demand.
Ukraine front and center, Russia is the world's third biggest oil producer, and prices are up because of concerns about how its war against Ukraine could disrupt its oil supply. After Russia invaded Ukraine back in February, the U.S. slapped sanctions against the Russian economy.
This was
And
going
while they
that
didn't
way.
put full sanctions in place against the
This
energy
one is
industry,
coming the
they
other
did
way.
take some smaller measures. And because of question marks about Russia's
like
ability
little
to ship oil,
things
some
here and
buyers have
there.
been scared away, meaning less supply and higher prices. There's another piece of this too. Oil prices started rising before the invasion with COVID.
Still working
At
on
the
this
beginning
shit.
of the pandemic, when people were in lockdown and staying home, the demand for oil dropped a lot. With so much supply, prices dropped too, big time. At one point, in April of 2020, dipping below zero. Keep in mind, the crude oil price makes up only a fraction of what you actually pay at the pump.
That
Only
face.
2 months ago, a barrel of crude in the U.S. cost $83 on average.
I gotta bring
Break
that
it down
a
per
little
gallon, that's
closer.
$1.98, but you were paying more than that.
I need
because
more
you have
yellow
to
up
add in the
there.
cost of
It's
taxes,
like a
distribution,
big yellow
marketing,
more.
refining, which is why the price at the pump then was on
Should
average
bring it in.
$3.41. Now, it's $3.84
Just stop
with
it.
real questions about how high it gets next. You got that question, I got
Okay.
that question, everybody
But
in the US has
then,
that question.
it's like this
President Biden
section
kinda
right
has that
here.
question, right? He says today it's a top
It
priority to
kinda-
get prices, like including for
It
gas,
kind
like
of
we just
goes
talked about,
like,
under control.
it wants to go
But he also had the
flat.
opportunity to talk
Let
about
me
some
do
good
this.
economic news today. Surprisingly strong jobs numbers for February. We found out today that last month 678,000
And then
jobs
over
got
here.
added, and unemployment fell from 4% to 3.8. That's the lowest since the start of the pandemic. And the number on the left side of your screen, 678, that's way more than all the smart economists had predicted. They thought it was going to be something like 440,000 jobs added. Joel and Kat joins us now to break this down. It is great to see you, Joe. So first of all, why was this so much better than economists expected? And what are the areas that like
I
drove some of
wanna-
that, right?
We're basically seeing the
Cause
fact that
then,
Omicron
if it,
really had
okay,
a
if it goes
muted
that
effect on
way,
people going
then
back
over
to work.
here,
A lot of economists were worried about that. That's why that estimate was so much
and then
lower.
this
But as a
one
result of this number, it
is
certainly
coming
was
this
very
way.
strong across a bunch of different
So it's
sectors.
going
But
this
one thing you
way,
have
this
to
way.
remember is when you get into the details of the
squares
jobs report,
off
the
over
number
here.
one thing I like to look at is wage growth. And if you look at that,
And then it
wages month to
starts
month
coming
only grew
down.
by 1 penny. Now, overall, over the last year, they've only grown
But
5.1%. You take a look at
Before
inflation,
that
it's still at record
happens-
highs, or 40-year highs, I should say. And inflation, 7.5%. So people are still struggling with gas prices, as you mentioned. Grocery food, all of that stuff adds up, which means inflation is still outpacing
Right.
wage growth, which justifies what Fed Chair Powell wants to do next month, which is raise those interest rates.
But explain then, businesses still dealing with the big labor shortage, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Businesses dealing with a serious labor shortage across all industries. We did see some good gains in hospitality and healthcare, construction, things like that. But there are shortages in education and across the board, even in retail and
Yeah.
restaurants right now. And so that's where you continue to see the labor shortage
hairline,
happening. And when you go
that
out
hairline
and you're
is
trying
so
to resume
weird.
what is the new normal, that's where you're seeing people not in those jobs, and you're feeling that wait time, or you're feeling
Cause
that
that
gap.
We
hairline,
talked about the unemployment rate ticking down a little, like, cool.
if you
Except for
see
groups
it,
who are left behind, right? So for example, Black women, disproportionately affected, as we've seen economically during the
The hell?
pandemic. The only group, I think, to see a little bit of an uptick. It
if
actually
you
went
see
up
it,
since last month.
it goes,
Yeah, it actually went up by 1/3 of a point, and what's interesting
it
here is
goes,
that that is the only
like this
a
is the
race and
hairline.
gender
It
group
starts
that
going
actually
flat
saw an
this
increase.
way.
Everyone else,
Then
including
over
Black men,
here,
either held steady or declined.
there's still a
Now, if
bit
you're
of the
looking at
hairline
the
over
reasoning
here, so it
why,
kind of goes
John Jay
this way a
Collins is
little
saying
bit.
that, look, Black
Then
women
it goes
work
this
in a lot of
way.
social services and health
It kind of
jobs.
squares up
Those
right
jobs
there.
have taken a long time to come back
So
in
it's
the
like
pandemic for
a
the obvious
triangle
reasons.
right
The
there.
reason you saw Black men do
Then
better
right
in terms of the
here,
unemployment rate
this
is because
surface,
many Black
it's
men
like,
do work in warehousing, for example, or construction, and those
it
areas
gives it
have seen
that,
much more growth in the past 6 months
where
to a
everything
year as
receives
the economy
back.
tries to make a comeback. So you are absolutely right. This
And
economic
then
recovery,
over
this
here,
comeback, so to
this
speak, is
connects to
uneven.
that.
It is
Okay.
not equal, and it affects different people
So
in
that
very
here, I
different
think I'm gonna bring that
We talked about,
higher.
I'm so glad you did. Joel and Kat, it's so great to see you. Thank you for being
Good
on
to
with
see
us
you
tonight
too.
on a Friday. Still to come on the show.
Okay.
Students in Florida are staging these walkouts over a
see
bill that limits how much classrooms can talk about sexual orientation and gender identity. We've got that just ahead in the local. And a
Here.
bananas update in a story you probably heard about a few years ago.
Bananas
Officials say this
update.
California mom who disappeared for weeks actually faked her own abduction.
People are
More on the
crazy.
charges
Like,
she's
what
facing
the
coming
fuck
up.
are you doing? Like, what are people doing?
So the Smithsonian is kicking off Women's History Month by
Maybe she
honoring
had
more
a
than 100 women
boyfriend,
in
a
STEM who are
husband.
trying
She
to make
couldn't
the
get
world a
away.
better place.
She wanted
And
to go with her
I cannot wait to
lover,
show
and
you
she was
how
like, "Well, I'll
specifically
just
they're
tell them
doing
I got
it.
kidnapped."
It's very orange, and it's very
Like, why
creepy.
would you
How's
say
that
you
for
got
tea? So I'll
kidnapped
take you to that
then?
exhibit in a couple of minutes. But first, NBC
Why
News
would
covers
you say
hundreds of
that shit?
stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our DC bureau, at least 10
Okay,
people
I'm
went to
gonna
the
take it
hospital
that
after a
way.
huge gas explosion at an apartment complex in Silver Spring, Maryland. 3 of them were hurt seriously, according to officials. I mean, look at this video, right? 100 people now have no place to live. They do not have
That
a home.
sucks.
Several people are still not accounted for.
That sucks.
From our Southeast Bureau, students in Florida staged walkouts to protest what critics call the Don't Say Gay bill there. That bill stops most classroom discussions about sexual orientation and gender identity in school. Local reports say one student even got suspended for organizing a walkout and handing out pride flags. And from our Northeast Bureau, New
Yeah, I
York City
could
public
imagine
school
because
kids can stop
some
wearing
people
masks
use that word.
inside
Oh, you
as
so
of today.
gay.
Mayor Eric Adams made the announcement. Face masks will still be
Especially
required for
kids.
students
Kids use
younger
that
than
word a
5
lot.
since, as you know, they are not eligible for the vaccine yet. Businesses in the city are not going to have to check vaccine cards at the door starting next week, too. Any moment now, a Northern California mom who claims that she was kidnapped at gunpoint, beaten, branded by her captors 5 years ago.
Why?
Here are the charges she's facing for allegedly making the whole thing up. You
Oh,
may
wow.
remember her, Sherry Papini. And you may remember her
Sherry
because look at this. She was in
Papini?
headlines everywhere across the country back in November of
fucking
2016. Her disappearance set off this
Sherry
huge
Papini.
nationwide search. The FBI got involved. She had been missing for 3
That's
weeks
like
when she was
Dick.
suddenly
Like,
found
who names
branded
their
and
kid
chained to a
fucking
highway
Dick?
on Thanksgiving Day back in 2016. At the time, her husband told ABC his wife had been tortured.
Papini.
She literally lived through hell. The bruises were just intense, the bumps.
Yeah, you see, that's her boyfriend. Husband. Oh, that's her husband.
And whatever else.
Yeah, you see?
Her family now says in a statement just coming into us today that law enforcement is pitting Sherry and her husband Keith Papini against each other.
There
So
you go. I could
what really
imagine.
happened? Well, here's what police say, that she was staying with her ex-boyfriend
You see?
just a few hours away from home.
You
all
see
that
what
time.
I
And then
did
all
you
those
see what?
bruises, all that
Look,
stuff she had,
I said that.
self-inflicted, they say.
I fucking
Gotti
said
Schwartz has
that.
been following the story from day one.
I
There are a
fucking
lot of
said
layers
that.
to this story, right, Gotti? You think about the family here, and you think about the timing. We are 5 years plus
Fucking
removed from
comes
this.
home,
How
her
did police
husband
finally
like, what
figure
the
out she
fuck?
was
Where you
lying?
been? I've
Like,
been
what
calling
happened?
you. I
Yeah,
got kidnapped.
that criminal complaint that you just showed, it reads like a novel, and it seems to really come down to the DNA evidence in the end. In particular, male DNA found on an article of her clothing that wasn't her husband's,
Now, over
when she was
here,
adamant that it was
then
two
this one
females
I
that
could.
kidnapped her at gunpoint, then held her for 22 days. Eventually, investigators were able to
Then
get what's
all
called
this
a familial match
investigation
for
that they
mysterious
did,
male
DNA, you know,
found on
DNA,
her
that can be
clothing, meaning They
inexpensive.
got a hit for somebody who was related to the match. They did some digging. They found out that that partial match came back to a guy who had a son who was an ex-boyfriend of Papini. So
Wow.
they went down to Costa Mesa. They went into his trash. They took a DNA sample from
So
a
stupid.
bottle
She's
of
so
green
stupid.
tea, and voila, the criminal complaint says they got a match. They then confronted the ex-boyfriend. He told them everything. He said that Sherry Papini had asked him to buy burner phones to talk to her. They had been chatting for months. That he said she told him she wanted to run away from her husband and asked him to help her.
Oh,
They
shit.
he headed up to Reading in a rental car, picked her up.
Wow.
He stayed with him allegedly.
You see, you
for those
can't,
next
girls
22
today, you
days
can't,
until,
like,
he says she told him to take her
girls
home
are
because she missed the
crazy.
kids on Thanksgiving
Like, what
Day.
the
But here's the
fuck,
thing,
man?
Gotti, and like, I just have to
Like,
ask
why
you, it's not
put me
like for
through
those
that
22
shit?
days they
Like, if
were,
you don't want to be
you know,
with me,
sipping Mai
tell
Tais
me
in a
and
hammock.
get
The
the
criminal
fuck
complaint
out of
says that
here.
she had him hit her with a
Leave,
hockey
leave.
You know, she was branded, that she had him brand her to make
Like,
her,
what
to
the
make it look more convincing, right?
Like, what
Does
the
it at
fuck
all
is wrong
explain
with
why
these
he
girls?
helped her do that?
Girls
So the
always
criminal
do
complaint
that.
details how he thought that he was helping her because she was making allegations of abuse. And like you just said, that criminal complaint
Even guys, I mean,
includes
like,
a
if
portion
you're
in which
gonna
the
get
boy-
into
the
a
ex-boyfriend
relationship,
says,
if you're not gonna
that
be
she did
serious,
most of
don't
the
don't
injuries
get
on the body-
involved,
on
you
her
know?
body herself. But at one point, he asked her to, quote, bank a puck off of her, which he did. And then he told investigators she also asked him to go to Hobby Lobby to buy some wood burning
You know,
kit, heat up
because
some
if you're
metal,
not gonna
and
be
then brand her
serious,
shoulder, which he also did. He also said when she was with him, that she appeared to be set on losing weight, and eventually when she was found, she was underweight, she had bruises on her body, and she had a brand on her right shoulder.
And those are all
She
the things
was
you just said are reasons why,
underweight. Of
for
course,
years
because the
now,
bitch
people
wasn't eating. They were
view her
fucking
as
for a whole
victim,
week.
right? She got money, victim assistance money from California. She collected something like $50,000, according to prosecutors, from like a GoFundMe
Which
page.
is fucking,
You know, she's now facing charges that could be really serious, you know?
yeah.
Absolutely. $50,000 from a GoFundMe page, $30,000 from a victims fund in California, and pretty early on, given the nature of her story about
Okay,
kidnapping,
this one over
the
here.
FBI was brought in. They stayed on that
I
case,
wanna
and so right
kinda
now, one of the
push this
charges
a
that
little
she's
bit
facing
more.
is lying to federal investigators.
Let me
The
see
other one
something.
is mail fraud because some of those payments that she received from the state came through the mail. So she just made her first appearance in court today, and we're hoping to hear a little bit more.
She must be
Yeah, I was
embarrassed
going to say, I
now.
know we're waiting on some of those updates, so Gotti Schwartz, we'll keep an eye out for your reporting here on that. Thank you so much for
Her
being on top of
husband
this.
must be
Coming
like
up after the
me.
break, the NFL
You look
officially
like a
benching all of its
fool.
COVID protocols,
What
while
you
the
just
league's
said.
deciding now to drop the rules.
Now you're gonna get
And what this
locked
could
up,
mean for other
go to
sports.
prison for
And
some stupid
I got to help reveal this
story you
history-making
made up.
exhibit at the Smithsonian honoring some amazing trailblazers this Women's History Month. Look at all that. We're going to show you more of it coming up in a sec.
Then this eye. Let me adjust.
So the NFL has just become the first professional sports league to operate just like it did before
And then
COVID.
this
With the
eye.
league, its players association suspending all COVID protocols. You talk
I
about
think
signs of things getting back to normal, quote unquote, the new normal. This is probably one of them.
That's
In a memo, the NFL explained
Let
it's
me
because
take
of, quote,
this.
encouraging trends regarding the prevalence and severity of COVID and the recent CDC guidance. So this means no more masking, no more social distancing, no more mandatory surveillance testing.
This
Players and
eye.
staff do not have to wear COVID tracking devices.
I want to bring this a
But
little
there's a
bit
caveat,
up
right?
this way.
Those protocols could come back at any time, according to the
Let me
NFL.
bring
Dr.
that
John Torres
little
joins me now.
strap.
And John, this is like symbolic, right? The NFL's in the offseason, I get it. There's still coaches and staff who work
I
year
need
round.
that
But
deep
but this feels like a symbolic
orange.
moment in the sports world, which was, you know, one of the first, and we saw it when the pandemic
use
first
this
started with the
color.
NBA, for example, being affected by COVID. Now you're seeing this stuff
Whoa.
left.
And Hallie, I think you're exactly
Oh,
right. I think we're
man.
starting to see the turning point here. Not only people's opinion of where we're headed with the pandemic, you know, getting to that endemic phase of the virus, but also you're starting to see real measures put in place based on what's going on around the country. And right now, you know, 50,000 cases a day. We still do have 1,400 deaths, and so we still need to be careful. But the mandates are dropping across the country. You know, guidelines are changing, and so the NFL is kind of following suit with that. And what they're saying is exactly what you said, that they're going to drop a lot of their mandates for the players and for the staff. Right now, around 95% of the players are
I'm gonna
fully
bring that up a
vaccinated,
little.
almost 100% of the staff fully vaccinated, and so it makes sense to do that in this case. But at the same time, they're saying, you know, voluntarily, if you have symptoms, so they're using the honor system, then let us know. We'll test you if you're positive, obviously isolation. But they're also saying, hey, be ready, because we could all of a sudden go back to some of these different standards we have, depending on how COVID goes, because we might not be quite out of the woods yet, but I think we're getting very, very close, Hallie.
You know, what's interesting is that you talk about teams or leagues that are still playing right now, NBA, NHL, they've relaxed their requirements, but they're not totally gone. Do you think this is a tipping point, Dr. John? Might we see other leagues do this?
I think you're going to see the other leagues do it, but I think you're going to see them do it a little more slowly. Main reason, if you look at the NBA and the
But then
NFL,
this
the
one
NHL,
goes
they
thinner.
play indoors in smaller
I
areas,
think I'm gonna
smaller
have to bring
arenas
this
versus
a
football, which plays
little.
either outdoors or in almost outdoor type stadiums, and so they don't have to worry about it as much. They have better ventilation. The NBA, you know, you're going to have those children in there that can't be vaccinated. You're going to have the immunocompromised that the vaccines aren't working all that well. So I think they just want to be a little more careful since fans are showing up right now, and they'll slowly start dropping those if we see the numbers continue to come down, which hopefully they will, Hallie.
Let me ask you about something else. I don't often, Dr. John, talk with you about Kyrie Irving, right? But like, let's talk about him. Obviously plays for the Nets, not vaccinated, can only play on the road. New York is ending. We just talked about how New York is ending its vaccine mandate, but it still applies to city workers, and that includes athletes who play there. Do you believe that is the prudent or best move? In other words, why would New York end the vaccine mandates for most people, but not city workers? How do they thread that needle?
And, you know, I think part of it is because of who they come in contact with and what they do when they come in contact with them. And so they're trying to stop that spread. And same thing here with the NBA saying, let's go ahead and make sure that they're either vaccinated or they're not playing to stop that spread. Again, you know, when you look at the NBA, you see fans right around the perimeter there. The players get in close contact with the fans, and that can be an issue. Same thing with the city workers. They come in close contact with a lot of people. So I think they're just being a little more careful. And I think we learned from a year ago when we started saying, you know, we don't need masks anymore. Things are getting back to normal. And then all of a sudden we had Delta and then Omicron. They're just waiting to see if the other shoe drops. And if it doesn't drop, then they're going to start releasing even or relaxing even some of these. And I think that's when you'll see that, Hallie.
Dr. John Torres, thank you so much. Great to see you. So you know March is Women's History Month, and this whole month long, NBC is introducing you to trailblazers who are shattering glass ceilings and up-and-comers you don't want to miss. And let me blow your mind with the statistic here. Are you ready? Hold on to your brains. If you look at the top 10, the top 12 biggest cities in the country, let's say, biggest cities in the country, guess how many of their statues show actual real women? Half a dozen, that's it. Well, guess what? That statistic changes today. Look at this, with the first look that I got this morning at a special exhibit that's opening this weekend right here in DC at the Smithsonian. This groundbreaking, really
but
empowering
what the girls
thing
have
that
you
honors
girls
women
done?
power
I mean,
players.
come on. I mean, it's like you haven't invented nothing or invented
Consider
the
the
fucking light
statues
bulb.
lining America's parks and city streets. What's missing?
You probably would have statues if you would have done something.
Women.
When our families and our kids are walking around, looking at the people that are
Well,
held
they
up
have,
as role
they do
models,
make babies.
they're
I
not seeing
mean,
anyone
that's
that looks like
kind of.
them. And we knew we wanted to fix that problem.
We're going to be 3D full body scanning you.
Now, the If Then initiative to support and honor women in STEM has created the biggest collection of statues depicting women ever
We have
assembled.
poets.
Women
poets.
120 3D printed statues of real women, trailblazers in science, tech, math, and engineering, standing proudly at the Smithsonian in
Frida
our nation's
Castro.
capital.
I mean, I don't know, being an
I am
artist
part of
is.
a team of scientists trying to save endangered species from extinction.
Women like Ray Wynn Grant, an ecologist and National Geographic explorer. It's
Now, this
all
is
to
a little
inspire
too-
the next generation of STEM leaders.
If we show little girls all these amazing women doing amazing work in this world, then each of them are going to know that they too can grow up and change the world.
I wish I got to see this when I was a little kid.
Reminds me of
We should put the first gay statue. The first person that dealt with. We could do that. That gay boy, that girl that got killed by those boys that they thought that she was.
Reveal the statue live on the Take Show this morning. It was
They
so
thought
cool.
she was a
We
girl.
wanted to show you. Check it
That
out.
was crazy. That story was.
Do you want to show us your mom's statue? Do you mind doing the big reveal for us? Yank it down that sheet and let's do it.
That was crazy.
All right, let's get out of here. Ready? All right, 3,
I wonder if we had any female boxers.
Look at that! It's me! What do you think? Such a cool moment, and so many amazing women that flown in from all over the country. Their parents, I got to meet so many of them. Very cool. Can't wait to bring my kid, my daughter, to go check that out. Have a great weekend. I'll see you back here Monday, same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.
NBC News app. And then this one goes a little lighter. And then it gets lighter here. And then it gets more lighter. Then it gets lighter right here. That means I gotta bring this down. I gotta bring this down a little more.
Good Friday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We begin with breaking news on the war in Ukraine. Overnight, concerns over a possible nuclear disaster. This video shows heavy shelling by Russian forces on a nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine. The
Then the
bombardment caused a
top, I
fire
gotta
that was
kind of
later
soften
put
that
out.
edge
Ukraine's
because
nuclear agency says Russian forces
I
now
don't want this
occupy
to,
the facility. And the International Atomic Energy Agency says while radiation levels are normal, quote, the physical integrity of the plant has been
then
compromised.
this goes
This
this
latest development comes as Russia is intensifying its attack on key cities in Ukraine's south and that massive convoy of tanks north creeping toward the capital, Kyiv.
As the fighting rages on, the situation on the ground is growing more dire. Ukrainian officials say Russia has agreed on humanitarian corridors for civilians looking to escape. More than 1 million have made it out already, many heartbroken to leave home.
right here. I'm gonna give a little highlight.
So beautiful with a lot of parks and cinema and theater. And now everything broke. It's crazy. There is everything broke. Everything.
After a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin yesterday, French President Emmanuel Macron is now warning that the worst is yet to come. With negotiations going nowhere, a growing humanitarian crisis, and advancing Russian troops, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had this message.
It's not about I want to talk with Putin. I think I have to talk with Putin. The world has to talk with Putin because there are no other ways to stop this war.
Dude, just leave.
We begin our coverage this morning with that news that Russian forces have captured Europe's largest nuclear power plant after
people are
Russian
dying,
shelling
I mean,
ignited a
half of the
fire at
city's
the
already
facility.
gone,
NBC
I
News
mean,
correspondent Aaron McLaughlin
people just
reports
gonna die,
from
I
western
mean.
Ukraine.
Hey, Joe and Savannah, all eyes on the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, which supplies about a quarter of this country's power, now under Russian occupation after fierce fighting between Ukrainian and Russian forces yesterday. A fire broke out at a training building on the site. That fire has since been extinguished, and according to officials, radiation levels remain stable. This as Russian forces continue to occupy the port city of Kherson, a city of some 300,000, the first city to fall to Russian forces in Putin's war. We've been speaking to residents there who are absolutely terrified. Yesterday was the first day they felt safe enough to leave their homes. We're speaking to one resident who wants to be known as Jimmy. He asked that we conceal his identity for fear of Russian reprisal. He described what he saw. Take a listen.
We all took a walk today, and what we've seen were deserted streets, queues at ATM machines. Maybe 3% of all shops were open, and they didn't have enough food in them. Despite some bombing, which happened during the takeover,
I think I'm a
I
little
could
too far.
call
New
it
York
a
City
silent
is a little
takeover.
too far.
We probably lost our town to the enemy, but majority thinks it's a temporary, and we have to hold on until the Ukrainian army frees us.
I was speaking to another man here in
Then over
Lviv
here,
who's very worried about his mother. She's in
this.
Kherson. He says that she's been working and helping the military, and he's very concerned she's going
You know what
to
I
be
was gonna
detained.
do?
He
The
doesn't know how
feather,
she's going to
the
get
way I
out.
have the
Right
feather
now
over
in
here.
Lviv, he's trying to get
I was
his
gonna
wife
get rid
and
of the
children
feather and
over
put
the border
a
into Poland, and then he's going to make his way back to Kherson to try
Put
and
a
save
gun.
his mother.
What do you
One
think?
of many desperate stories we're hearing about in Ukraine. Guys.
All right, Aaron, thank you. Let's get more on that nuclear plant attack with
This
Andrew
feather,
Weber.
I
He's a
don't know
senior
if I'm
fellow
gonna
at the
do it.
Council on Strategic Risks and the former Assistant Secretary
Could
of
have just
Defense
put a
for
gun
Nuclear,
right
Chemical,
there.
and Biological Defense
I'll probably
Programs
sell the
under
painting
President
quicker if
Obama.
I
Andrew,
was to
thanks
do
for
it
joining us.
that way.
We should remind our viewers this fire has been put out. Authorities say the site has been made safe. Still, this is Europe's largest nuclear power plant.
Okay,
Can we
over
breathe
here.
much of a sigh of relief here? And just how dangerous could this have been?
No, we can't.
I was gonna do that in the beginning.
But the totally planned attack on a nuclear power plant, actually 6 reactors at this facility. It provides 25% of the power to Ukraine,
Right,
and
so,
to attack it, apparently
that's what
including
people
with
like,
shells
you
and
know.
cause
They
a
like
fire,
stuff like that.
it's absolutely outrageous.
Just looking at these big paintings, this artist
Potentially very, very
does,
dangerous. Imagine the reactor staff now. Essentially, they're hostages,
He puts
and we have to rely on
well,
them
anything
to
like
safely operate
guns,
the plant.
anything.
So this was just another example of Russia's 19th century
But I
brutal
think this
form
is not
of
too bad now.
warfare
Then over
that
here,
has to stop.
What is your biggest fear here now moving forward, especially with this plant?
Well, the biggest fear with this plant is that the operators won't be on site, or they were killed or injured, and I'm sure that the Russian military did not bring along a staff to operate such a facility. So if their intent is to shut off a big chunk of Ukraine's electricity, it will take skilled staff to turn the reactor down in a safe way. And I don't believe they have a plan for that. So it is a risky time, and thank goodness so far there doesn't appear to be any radiation release.
Andrew, Ukraine has a couple other nuclear plants dotted around the country. Do you think Russia could be eyeing those other sites as part of its strategy? And how
most
do we know, does this
definitely.
capture benefit Russia's plans?
Well, it's not unusual in military campaigns to take out a country's electricity and power supply
Yeah.
to reduce their fighting capabilities, but it is very unusual to go after nuclear power plants. So this is really unprecedented and extremely dangerous, and we need to have a ceasefire, and the plant needs to be given back to Ukrainian control so that the skilled staff there can operate it safely.
Andrew Weber, thanks so much for joining us this morning to help us better understand this unfolding situation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, of course, all this fighting is impacting real people. Russia's invasion has upended the lives of Ukrainians, forcing them out of their homes and into any kind of shelter to stay safe. Z. Gaiman has been taking shelter inside a church basement in Ukraine with her 2 children for a week, and she joins us now. Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your time, especially right now. So first, just tell us, how are you? How are your children doing right now? And do you feel safe where you are?
Safe is a relative term right now. We're alive and well. I keep posting on Facebook the updates, and that's the standard phrase that I say, that we're alive, because there is no guarantee we will wake up in the morning. The shelling continues pretty much all day. There are eight strike alarms pretty much all day long. Right now is actually an airstrike alarm going off right here. The families are scared. Many don't know whether they should leave or stay. So that's the main question that many people are facing, because many family husbands can't leave because there is general mobilization, and many people don't want to leave without their spouses. So for me personally, that's my choice to stay here because my husband is currently serving in territorial defense, so it's very important for me to be close.
Why?
And, yeah, especially in
That
times like
doesn't make sense. I wouldn't want my
Let's talk a
family,
little bit about your husband. I know he did
my
volunteer to be
wife
part
and
of the
kids in
Ukrainian
a
defense
city
team.
where
How's that been
it's
for
being
you? I
blown
mean, I know
up.
we're all looking on just in awe of the resilience of your country, of
stupid.
Ukrainian people. What's it like, though, personally right now? Have you spoken to your husband at all, and just how's this impacted you and your kids?
Oh, man.
We try to. I have seen him 3 times since the start of the war last Thursday. Both times, like all 3 times, it was just for a few minutes when he stopped by for supplies like sleeping bags for his team, because at first they were really not supplied with basic necessities. Now the situation changed, thank God, but it's hard. Every 2 to 3 days I break down crying because I just have no idea
Okay, let me make this.
whether the next strike
I'm gonna
will
make this
hit
one a little
where
bigger
he is.
because these pupils are a little.
So yeah, it's hard.
What's it been like trying to talk to your kids about what's going on?
I try to be honest. I try to tell them that this is war. But at the same time, I try to tell them the reasoning behind us staying and
Yeah,
why
she
we're
still
staying
has
here,
light,
that
too.
Dad is doing okay. He keeps sending messages, even if it's a smiley, whenever he has access to his phone and whenever he has time. So we try to manage it like that.
So, Gaiman, thank you so much. We are thinking about you. We will check in with you. And as you said, it's a relative term right now, but stay safe, and we'll be thinking about your family.
Thank you. Yep.
Let's head to Moscow and NBC News global correspondent Raf Sanchez. So, Raf, in televised remarks yesterday, Russian President Putin said his military operation in Ukraine is going to plan. But inside Ukraine, that does not exactly seem to be the case, especially in the first few days of this. What else is Putin saying about this invasion so far?
So Vladimir Putin presented a version of reality yesterday that just does not match up with what our teams are seeing on the ground. He talked about Russian forces fighting against neo-Nazi Ukrainians being supported by mercenaries from the Middle East. who are holding Ukrainian civilians hostage. Now, what we are seeing is Ukrainian population rallying against this Russian invasion, in some cases literally throwing themselves in front of Russian tanks to stop their advance. One of the most discouraging notes we heard from President Putin yesterday wasn't actually in that speech, but it was in a readout of a call he had with President Emmanuel Macron of France, where he said, this special military operation, that's how the Kremlin refers to the invasion of Ukraine, will continue until all of its goals are met. And the reason that's so discouraging is Russian and Ukrainian negotiators are meeting, and in theory, they are trying to hammer out some kind of ceasefire, some kind of peace deal. But President Putin seems to be suggesting that his forces will continue to advance, and he says he will not allow the Ukrainians to play for time at the negotiating table.
Yeah, let's talk more about those talks between Russian and Ukrainian officials. Not a lot of progress. Both countries did tentatively agree on establishing what are known as humanitarian corridors. Tell us, what exactly does that mean, and do we have any idea if more talks could be coming?
Yeah, so humanitarian corridors would basically be kind of localized ceasefires in very specific areas that would be designed to allow civilians to leave the area and to allow food and medical aid to come in. Now, there's a certain irony to humanitarian corridors. It obviously sounds extremely desirable, and from the perspective of the Ukrainian government, they want those corridors to try to get their people safe. But the Russians may also have a vested interest in these humanitarian corridors because they ideally would like as few civilians inside of the Ukrainian cities as possible, because that way they can attack, they can use heavier weaponry without being as concerned about killing civilians and drawing in the world's condemnation. In terms of the next round of talks, round 3, the Russians say there will be another round sometime next week. We don't have exact timing, we don't know where. Joe?
All right, Raf Sanchez in Moscow. Raf, thank you.
NBC News military analyst Colonel Jack Jacobs joins us now. Colonel, good morning. So I do want to start with what happened overnight at that nuclear plant in southern Ukraine. So it caught fire, as we've mentioned, during this heavy Russian shelling. And after it was put out, Ukrainian nuclear officials said the plant is now occupied by Russian forces. This is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, and it's one of several in Ukraine. How concerned should we be about this latest development? I mean, when you hear that this is the type of site that they've
This is a
taken over,
painting
what
that
does
was
it
done
make you
back
think?
in the Renaissance, and
Well, there were two things right away.
I
First
kind
of
of
all, the
bought it
violence with which
back.
it was taken. And Andrew Weber, your previous guest, who's an expert in these things, enumerated a number of
It's a painting Rembrandt did.
horrifying things that could happen and could have happened. Now that the Russians have it, the most significant thing from that standpoint is their inability to actually run it properly. And the fact that they need the
modern now, it's
Ukrainian
more-
experts there in order to continue to run it. Don't forget, I can't remember what percentage he said the electricity in Ukraine it delivers, but it's a significant percentage of it. So whether to continue to run it, that requires Ukrainian expertise, because the Russians certainly don't have it. Or to shut it down, that requires Ukrainian expertise. It is not entirely clear whether or not the Ukrainians who are capable of running it or shutting it down are there. The second thing
This here.
is that if they're not there, it's a very, very dangerous situation. You don't just turn a switch and turn it off, because that could cause a nuclear incident. The other thing is that the Russians probably want to shut it down, because they want to deprive all of Ukraine with utilities, and so their objective is to shut it down altogether, which is why they wanted to secure it in the first place. And so it's very concerning. With respect to the videos that we've seen, we saw tracers, the firefight that was taking place there on the site, that large wall of light that you saw coming down, that was an aerial flare dropped by aircraft so that the Russians can see the people the Ukrainians who are defending it. That's a fire. Its whole purpose is to light it up, and when it hits the ground, it sets fire to things. It's an extremely reckless and dangerous situation, still, because the Russians are not capable of running this site.
Yeah, Absolutely.
And then I'll
I do
come
have another
back.
question for you. This one's actually from a viewer, not about nuclear power, but nuclear weapons. So President Putin, we remember, ordered Russia's nuclear forces to be put on high alert. Now, a viewer, Jamie Diaz, asks, what if the Kremlin does end up
And
using
then these
nuclear
little
bombs
ones-
in Ukraine or any other countries? What would be the next move for the UN or the United States? Obviously, this is an extreme next step, steps down the road, but what do you say to that, Colonel?
Well, the UN doesn't have anything at its disposal, so we can forget about that. I don't think we have a plan B with respect to the use of tactical nuclear weapons by the Russians. I guess we can impose more economic strictures on them. I think our allies and others who have not yet done so will do so. I think he's disinclined to use weapons of any kind, tactical nuclear weapons, and certainly not strategic nuclear weapons. Among other things, his great pal at the moment, who's keeping some distance, is China. And China has already started to sort of distance themselves. I think that it's always possible that he may use tactical nuclear weapons. I think it's highly unlikely.
Colonel Jack Jacobs, thank you so much. As always, we so appreciate your
See
analysis.
underneath it.
As Russia intensifies those air and ground assaults against Ukrainian cities, more than a million
right here.
refugees have already fled the country. UNICEF estimates children make up half of that number, a number that is growing by the hour. NBC News correspondent Allison Barber joins us now from the Poland-Ukraine border, where so many of these displaced families are arriving. Allison, good morning to you. So the UN has estimated this war could ultimately displace 4 million Ukrainians. So what preparations are being made there to try and take care of so many people? How organized is the response?
It's very much a work in progress, and I'll break down a little for you some of what we've seen here, but you mentioned how so many of the refugees are believed to be children. That's what we've seen as we've been out here the last 2 days reporting. This is our 5th border stop on the Poland-Ukrainian border, and you see all these faces of children, and you talk to some of them. Imagine with me for a minute that you are 8 or 9 years old. You have been just a few days ago at home playing with friends, drawing with chalk on the sidewalk, and then in an instant you are forced to go and hide in bomb shelters. You have to frantically pack everything you own or what little you can carry with you, say goodbye to your brother who's then going to stay and fight in a war, and then flee with your mother to a completely new country.
right
For
there.
most of us, we cannot even imagine that, but here in this makeshift refugee
over
camp,
here.
that is a story that many people have
The
different
eye
versions
is
of. We have a
so
little girl in this
different.
tent. She's 8 years old. Her name is Angelina. She was living in Kyiv, and she had to flee here. Listen to what she told me.
What was it like for you when you were at home and you heard all these?
І як тобі було вдома, коли почалася оця страшна подія? It was really scary. And then, when my mommy comforted me,
The shadow
it was
underneath
always
the shadow.
Did you say to your brother when you?
Що ти сказала своїм дітям, коли ви залишали їх в Україні? I told my daughter, my
That
brother,
one is.
I really love you. I love you very, very much.
You're very brave. Did you know
Ти
you were
дуже
so
смілива.
Yeah.
Ти знаєш, ти дуже смілива.
Everything is
Yes,
darker. I'll probably let that stay the way it is and let it dry, and then I'll come with the glaze and get darken it with the glaze. Over here.
I want them not to be afraid and not to worry. I want them to listen to their parents. Because their parents love them
Oh,
more
how
than anyone else.
cute.
This is one of the most organized assistance areas we've seen. We watched as electricians came and ran cables up every single power pole, putting in electrical outlets so people can charge their phones, so they can get heat to these tents. Most of these tents, they are heated. There is food, coats, water, really most anything anyone would need immediately. We were speaking to the people who are organizing and running this site. This is done by the local government, and they said in terms of food, in terms of blankets, strollers, you can see how many strollers there are there. Another reminder of how many children are impacted by this. They say they have enough locations, but the biggest challenge right now is transportation. People are coming to the crossing, and they might anyone they can go stay with in cities. They need to get to other areas where there are more places for them to stay, but they need rides to do that. Warsaw is about 4 hours away from here, so having transportation and drivers to take people, that's a huge hurdle. Joe?
So many hurdles, but I concur. Angelina is very brave. Ellison, thank you so much for that report. We really do
Let me
appreciate it.
see if I can just.
And we'll have more coverage out of Ukraine just ahead, but we're also following other news this morning, including an NBC News exclusive. Former Attorney General Bill Barr speaking out about his dealings with former President Trump.
And I told him
I
that
think I'm
all
gonna.
this stuff was bullshit
I'm gonna let this sit.
and about election fraud.
This over here. I
Up
don't know.
next, our
These
own
eyes
Lester
look
Holt
a
joins us
little
with that
weird.
interview.
That
But
eye
first,
over
since
here
Barr
looks too
resigned as
much
Attorney
that
General.
way. doesn't
And
it?
New York City on edge after a string of subway attacks across the city. A look at the problem and what's being done to keep passengers safe. You're watching Morning News Now.
Yeah, people going nuts.
Welcome back. The latest out of Ukraine just ahead, including the situation at a nuclear power plant that caught fire overnight. It's now under the control of
Going
Russian
this
forces.
way.
But we also want to get you caught up on some of the other
Going
big
that
stories
way.
this morning, including a big headline. Police officer involved in the raid that left Breonna
I
Taylor
think I gotta
dead
bring
has
this
been
one
found
down.
not
Yeah, I
guilty
see
of
what I gotta
wanton
do.
endangerment. Former Louisville police officer Brett Hankerson
It's like just
was
when you
acquitted
think you're
Thursday. The
done,
three
you're not
counts of wanton
done.
endangerment were not connected directly to Taylor's
You
death
gotta
nearly 2
still
years ago. Rather,
just-
he was accused of endangering the lives of a neighboring family when he fired shots
like you're never
that went
done.
into their apartment. Hankerson's defense
This here,
argued
this
he was
is
defending
too
his fellow
wide.
officers.
This
Taylor
needs
was
to
killed in March 2020 during a botched
just
police
slightly
raid. Hankerson is the only
up to
officer
there.
involved in the raid who has ever been charged with anything, and no charges were ever
That
filed
needs to come up
directly
to
relating
there.
to Taylor's death.
Then
Now,
this.
crime in New York City's subway system has surged in recent weeks, even after Mayor Eric Adams started a new plan to send more cops and mental health workers into the stations to help fight the problem. NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson has more.
Major crimes on New York City transit up 30% this week, even after the mayor's subway safety plan went into effect.
I have seen a slight increase in.
Do you feel safer?
I feel fine.
A little. The safety plan announced 2 weeks ago sent 1,000 more police officers and teams of health workers into the city subway system.
Public safety and justice, they are the prerequisite to prosperity.
While enforcement has gone up, with the NYPD reporting 64% more arrests since the week before, according to
Oh, at least
NBC
the
New
fucking
York.
guy's doing
Crime
something
remains a
now.
problem. In Queens, a 57-year-old woman was viciously attacked with a hammer and robbed as she entered a subway station.
She told me she had been telling the perpetrator, stop, but apparently he just kept hitting her over the head and then ran off with a bag.
Police arrested 57-year-old William Blount days later on an attempted murder charge. We could not immediately reach Blount or his attorney for comment, and on the day the plan went into effect, a man smeared human feces in a 43-year-old woman's
You see what I gotta
face
go
at a
through living in
subway
New York?
station.
That's an horrific experience for anyone.
And they let that guy
to go
out.
through human waste and someone spitting in your face. Those are real signs of mental health issues.
The alleged perpetrator, 37-year-old Frank Abrokwa, now facing a slew of charges, including assault, according to court documents, released
of
on his own
shit.
recognizance, prompting outrage. The Bronx District Attorney's Office telling NBC News they requested Abrokwa be held on bail and supervised release, but the judge denied both. Abrokwa is also facing hate crime charges for a prior incident in Brooklyn. He's
Sure.
on supervised release for that. His attorney had no comment without Abrokwa's consent.
I do not understand why the MTA cannot ban people like that guy who had 3 priors. We take away driver's licenses for, one drunk driving episode.
Overall, major crimes on transit so far this year are in line with 2016 to 2019 statistics, according to the NYPD, although ridership is still down significantly. Why are people like this being released?
That's what happens when you fucking vote liberal.
Categories of what bail would be required.
Joseph Jackalone is a retired NYPD sergeant and professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. He says
Try to
addressing
fucking
crime
go
on trains
home
begins
from
above
that shit
ground.
when you vote liberal.
These cases had to deal with somebody who's
People
homeless
talking about
and
defunding the police and all. I mean, just because it's one bad cop, let's defund the police. Also, with that intelligence, let's get rid of the whole apple tree because we have one bad apple. We can't make no apple pie. because
revealing what it
they
was
all
like
must
to
be
work
bad.
for the former president inside the White House and what ultimately tore them apart. NBC Nightly News anchor Lester Holt joins us now on set with more
People
on
are
his
so
experience
stupid.
with this exclusive interview with the former Attorney General. Thanks, Lester. How are you
Yes,
today?
Ben and Joe, good to see both of you in his new memoir, One Damn Thing After Another.
That's sad,
Barr
man.
opens up about the former president and the criticisms that Barr sometimes acted more as the former president's personal lawyer rather than attorney general. And he addresses
He's
how
out.
the
I know.
relationship
Oh, man. I'm gonna be ready.
Take me back to that day, December 1st.
I'm
You
gonna
were in
be
the SCV.
ready.
Did you know you were going to end up in the Oval Office before the day was up?
I assumed I was.
Attorney General Bill Barr knew he had infuriated the president. Since election night, Trump had been insisting he'd won.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country.
Barr knew that wasn't true. He'd even had the Justice Department investigate. Now, he was being summoned to the president's private dining room after saying in an interview with the AP that Trump's claims of election fraud were wrong.
And I told him that all this stuff was bullshit and about election fraud. And, it was wrong to be shoveling it out the way his team was.
He also told Trump what he thought of his legal team. Not a lot.
I said, the reason you are where you are is because you wheeled out a clown show of lawyers.
A clown show?
Yeah, clown car or something like that. I said, it's just a bunch of clowns.
Who are you referring to? Rudy Giuliani?
The Cracker Jack legal team, among others.
Barr says the president shot back, listing the ways he said Barr had failed him. That's when Barr says he offered up his resignation.
I said, okay, well, look, I understand you're upset with me, and I'm perfectly happy to tender my resignation. And then, boom.
He slaps the desk.
He slapped the desk, and he said, accept it, accept it. And then, boom, he slapped it again, accept it. Go home, don't go back to your office, go home.
Oh, shit.
You're done.
When we asked the former president about this meeting, he disputed Barr's account and told us he was the one who demanded Barr's resignation. Either way, Barr handed in a resignation letter 2 weeks later and has not spoken with Donald Trump since. He does not want him to run for president again. January 6th.
He's gonna win. He's coming back. He's coming back at 24.
That President Trump was responsible for
And
what happened here.
I'm not gonna be. I'm not gonna get caught up with that every 4 years back and forth.
It appears that
I
part
mean,
of the
I will
plan
vote
was to
for
send
any
this
person,
group
liberal
over the hill.
or
I think the whole idea was to
conservative,
intimidate Congress,
that
and I think that was
will
wrong.
fucking do the
In a
right
three-page
shit.
letter to NBC News, President Trump trashed Barr's book as fake and hurled personal insults at his former attorney general, calling him a coward, a big disappointment.
Can't get caught up with these.
Lester, why
'Cause
didn't
you'll
the
go
former
nuts.
Attorney General speak out sooner about election
They'll make you
concerns
go
on January
nuts.
6th? I mean, over a year down the road. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I pushed him on that, and I said you were in a position of influence.
You
You
were
had
really
this opinion
going
that
nuts.
it was fake, and maybe you could have short-circuited what ultimately happened on the January 6th. His feeling was it was already out there, it was
Let me
baked
darken
in. He
this a little
blamed the
bit.
people that surrounded the president of really kind of
No, but I didn't know
sending
he
him
got
down
fired.
down this rabbit hole.
Lester, thank you so much. Great to have you on set. Great to have this exclusive
I
interview.
missed that
You can
one.
watch the full interview tonight. Bill Barr in the Eye of the Storm, this Sunday at 9 p.m.
the
Eastern,
storm.
only on NBC.
Gonna check on your morning news now, weather.
Bill Cairns joins us now. Hey, Bill.
I wonder, did he write a book?
Hey,
Because
good morning.
they all
Let's
write
watch
books.
TV Sunday night. Gonna have to sit down with the family on that
All
one.
fucking
Let's
write
go and
books.
take a look at this
Everybody's
forecast. We have
writing
record
books.
highs this weekend, so you get to play all day Sunday in the heat, and then you can go inside and watch that
Everybody.
later Sunday night. Because we are going to see some extraordinarily warm temperatures for the East Coast this weekend. Everywhere from about Texas to the eastern seaboard, this tropical moisture is going to head all the way to the north, even into northern Vermont. We'll have a chance for some record highs, 15 to 30 degrees warmer than normal. And as far as records go, every city with a dot on
This
this
is
map has a
pretty
chance to
much-
break a record high this
I
weekend.
guess-
Most of those in the northeast and northern parts of
this
New England,
is-
that
I
would be
mean,
on
I don't know,
Sunday.
I'm trying to
So
get
how
so
warm will it get?
perfect.
We start
'cause-
today, 70s, mid-70s in areas like Oklahoma, 80s in Alabama and Mississippi, And then tomorrow, we see temperatures as warm as mid-70s. Kansas City, St. Louis, Cincinnati, Lexington, Louisville, everyone. Nashville's
some more
included
light
too.
up there.
And then finally, by the time we get to Sunday, that warmth makes it to the mid-Atlantic. Look at Raleigh, 80s on Sunday and Monday. D.C. is going to be upper 70s Sunday and Monday. New York, it looks like into the 60s on Sunday and Monday. And Boston probably in the 50s. So here's your weekend forecast. And unfortunately, for our friends in the West, we're still dealing with stormy weather. And this snowstorm, yes, snowstorm, will be moving through the higher elevations of the Rockies and into the northern plains Saturday into Saturday night. It does look like a chance of some isolated severe storms in Iowa Saturday. So for my friends from the Quad Cities, Cedar Rapids, all the way through Des Moines, heads up for you. And then on Sunday, along with that warm temperatures, will come a little bit of rain shower activity in New England. Heavier rains and thunderstorms from Little Rock to Memphis up to areas around Paducah. And we're still seeing more snow in areas of the West. So we'll have a snowstorm this weekend. We'll have numerous record highs, maybe a tornado or two. That's early spring for you guys. You got a little bit of everything.
No kidding, a little bit of everything. The roller coasters, you
I was
like to
gonna say, we
say.
need that roller coaster video again that you guys bring us sometimes.
But that's crazy. I mean, how
Thanks,
can you
though.
tell them not to go back to the office? I mean, I gotta get my shit, right?
And desperate to escape war up next.
Don't go
Look
back
at the
to the
efforts to help
office.
more than 1 million refugees forced to flee their homes as Russia attacks Ukraine.
And it's not just Ukrainians. People from all over the world looking to be rescued from the war in Ukraine. Now their home countries are stepping in. That's next on Morning News Now.
This morning, we want to take a closer look at the relief efforts underway in Europe to help the estimated 1 million refugees displaced so far by the war in Ukraine.
500,000 of those refugees are children, according to UNICEF, and these numbers are growing by the day. They'll likely continue to grow over the weeks and months to come.
Joining us now is Nancy Dent, Senior Communications Officer for the International Rescue Committee, one of the many organizations on the ground in the
I'm
region.
guessing
Nancy,
we're gonna be
good to
seeing
have
a
you
lot
with
of
us. So just tell us more
refugees,
about your operation
Ukrainian
there in
girls
Poland
in
and
New
the
York
region,
City.
and help us understand just how bad this crisis has become.
So thank you so much for having me. So the International Rescue Committee has been here on the ground in Poland since early February. We've been scoping out various scenarios, to see what the worst case could be and how humanitarian actors could step in. We're currently supporting local organizations who really understand the local communities and have been supporting people as they flee for many weeks now. And people, when they arrive on the border, they might be in a reception point which has got beds, camp beds type things set up, and it's quite organized, and people can have a sleep, they can rest, they can either stay for a couple of nights or they might stay for a couple of hours and then move on into Poland where they might have families, friends, people that they can stay with. And the IRC is working with these local organizations, and we're providing non-food items, so things like blankets, sleeping bags, things that will really help people stay warm and feel protected once they've arrived in Poland.
Absolutely. Nancy, I'd also like to get your reaction to the news about these humanitarian corridors, which would allow more civilians to evacuate Ukraine safely. How does this change things for your organization, and how are you preparing for the estimated millions more Ukrainians who are expected to flee?
Exactly. I mean, the news for the humanitarian corridors is so
kinda
recent,
like
and we do
feather it.
welcome it as a first step in kind of providing safety to those people who are currently
If I
trapped
leave a
in
bus
makeshift
down
bomb
too
shelters
strong
and
here,
metro
I'll get
stations,
too
as
hard
we've
of
all
a
seen.
mark.
These
Then
humanitarian
over here.
corridors aren't a permanent solution. What we really need in
Over
terms
here.
of safety is a ceasefire and a
I
political
do need
settlement.
this a little
But
cooler.
right now, the humanitarian corridors will mean that people can make informed decisions about whether they want to stay or remain inside Ukraine. But that can only happen if there are security guarantees, which mean that people can leave and not be at risk of getting caught in any more violence. And we also need to have clear communications on the objectives. Why are these humanitarian corridors being put in place? How long are they going to last for? And also, how are they going to be implemented so that people can feel safe if they do try to leave?
Nancy, we also want to ask you, I mean, we're hearing reports of discriminatory treatment, even racist abuse against people of color who've been trying to flee Ukraine. We're a little tight on time here, but what have you heard about this, and what would you like to see done to just make sure everyone who wants to get out safely can?
These reports are extremely troubling. At the border points where IRC have been scoping out our response, we have seen lots of people of different nationalities, including some Syrians and some Afghans. And I think, we can say that the situation has improved drastically in Poland, but that doesn't mean it's not happening in other places. And we continue to call for safe and regular pathways for everybody, regardless of their race, color, or creed.
Nancy, thank you so much for joining us and for everything you're doing to try and help these millions of people who are going to need help in the coming weeks and months. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, as this refugee crisis unfolds in Ukraine's neighboring countries, it's seen over 1 million run from war. Well, those refugees are not just Ukrainians. They're people from all over the world, including Latin America, and governments are stepping in to try to rescue their countrymen and women from the devastation. Here's NBC News correspondent Isa Gutierrez with more.
A Mexican Air Force plane carrying dozens of Mexican nationals and their families who lived in Ukraine headed one way to Mexico City.
They have Mexicans over there?
Resguardo de bombas todos los días, pues
Ukraine?
es difícil estar escuchando las bombas, los disparos en la ciudad.
University student Guillermo Padilla boarding the plane in Romania with at least 80 others who, like him, crossed the border out of Ukraine earlier this week.
You know what I don't understand is like if you live in Ukraine and you're Mexican, you're African, you're Indian,
miles back home.
and you
The
made it your
country's
country,
Secretary
why
of
you want to
Foreign Affairs
leave now?
tweeting Thursday morning about
Why
the
don't you
operation.
fight?
But for most Mexican
Oh, no, it's
refugees,
not your
Ukraine
country?
had become
Oh.
a new home.
Es la bandera del país que me ha dado todo por 10 años.
Before the war broke
Yeah,
out
so
last
fight.
week, over 200 Mexicans were living in Ukraine. And while some gratefully look forward to new beginnings,
I want to see Mexico.
Others, like Larissa Garcia, who's been living in Ukraine for 27 years, say they won't be going back to Mexico.
Es una invasión.
Latin American countries like Peru, Brazil, and Argentina also working to get hundreds of their nationals to safety.
Aqui, graças a Deus, estamos bem. Eles seguem para a Polônia, para a Romênia.
They bring with them the few belongings they could carry, and memories of war they say they'll never forget.
Retumba todo, las ventanas, las casas, piensas que están cerca de ti.
Mis estudiantes están en búnkeres ahora. Mis mejores amigas están en búnkeres.
Isa Gutierrez, NBC News.
Coming up, our breaking news coverage continues on the invasion in Ukraine.
Yeah, up next, expert analysis on Russia's military advancement
Oh, I don't
following
wanna be
the Russian
American no
attack
more.
on that
Get me outta
nuclear
here.
power plant. This is Morning News Now.
I ain't know you was gonna act like this.
Welcome back. Let's return to our top story this morning.
Ukrainian authorities say Russian forces have seized one of the country's nuclear power plants, and it happens to be Europe's largest. A fire broke out at the site, which Ukraine has blamed on Russian shelling. Officials say the fire, though, is out, and the facility is safe this morning. Let's get more on this and the overall Russian military strategy with Clint Watts. He's a distinguished research fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and an NBC News national security analyst. Clint, good morning. Good to have you with us and have you at this big board to walk us through this. So how does this capture of this nuclear power plant play into Russia's wider military strategy? We saw them take the defunct Chernobyl site, but that was on the road to Kyiv. So what's this about here now, and how important is this moment?
Yeah, significant for three different reasons. When we look at this nuclear plant, we heard about the firefight that was happening overnight. You saw some of the videos that were coming around that area. It really comes down to three things. One is control.
I don't like the way
the
this
Russians
thing
want to
came
take
out, to be
control of
honest.
the power because they're doing siege warfare. Much like you see in Mariupol,
I'm
and
really
some of these cities,
happy
they want
with
to cut
this.
the power, they want to destroy the infrastructure, a way to essentially take control of the population. The second is psychological. In Russian doctrine, especially in the disinformation space, using fear of nuclear as a way to essentially message both abroad and at home that the Ukrainians might be up to something, essentially a disinformation ploy to really bring everyone under the banner. And the third one, which I want to mention, is we forget that nuclear power plants are infrastructure points for all sorts of logistics. Logistics is something the Russians are struggling with. A railhead here is very important for the Russians with their armor units because if they can seize these and outside of major urban centers that could come under attack, they can begin to put things like armored vehicles onto rail cars and sort of move them around the country much faster and at
We
lower
have
cost.
to like kind
I think
of.
the bigger picture of what we're seeing right now is the South. What really wasn't talked about in the first week, we focused on the North and the
Really
convoy,
happy
their
with this
struggles
one.
in the Russian military. What we see now is the South is really where they're taking hold. These are the
too,
units out of Crimea, which we see in
painterly. It's
2014.
not,
They've advanced on Mariupol, and you're seeing
I
siege
want
warfare,
a more
indirect
bravado
fires,
brush
destructive
marks.
attacks, total infrastructure breakdown. Mariupol is I think,
Heavy.
the
So I
forecast
guess
of what we might see in
after
Kyiv over
everything
time.
dries now,
Separate is this
I'll
advance
do
on
a
Kherson.
few
You
heavy
probably
brush
saw that they
marks.
took a bridge. They've essentially been able to advance. That's the mouth of the Dnieper River coming off the Black Sea.
The one
This
here.
is a very important logistical point. And once they get to the
Where's
west
that
side, what you're
boat
seeing
at?
today are some battles as they move to this next bridgehead here over this next estuary. If they can get past that, essentially from that point forward, all the way to the Moldovan border, they can cut off and essentially encircle Odessa, which is a major port city that is a logistical hub, but also one where they can bring in additional
Look at
combat
this one,
power
right?
over the
This
next few
is-
days. So that's going to be a significant issue that pops up. The southern battle plan, while it was stalled a little bit in the beginning, is really starting to take off for the Russians, and it will give them a real logistical boost.
Yeah, and Clint, how does that help them then with the goal of trying to get into the capital of Kyiv? What's happening in that part of the country?
Earth tones.
So this is the bigger picture. They started off with a very bold plan that was designed to be done in a week. They failed with that. It was a three-front fight. They pushed into Sumy
It's more
here,
modern.
the
I think
convoy
I'm
area,
gonna
which we know about
skim
coming in
it
from
a little
Belarus,
bit.
and then the southern front. Overall, though, what they're trying to do is essentially cut
Then over
Ukraine in
here.
half. The Dnieper River, which we were talking about just before, runs roughly
Could
like this
do
up to
that,
Kyiv.
'cause I
If they
know
can get
that.
to the west side
Well,
here,
I have
they can
that
start
already.
to encircle all the way around and from the south. And if they can cut off
'Cause
all the
that's
way
the
to the
one
west,
that,
if they've lost the sea, Ukraine can't resupply here in the south. This leaves only land resupply, which is much more difficult. And then that brings
This
into
part
the
right
case
here,
of what Russia
it
would do
goes-
then. That really pulls NATO, Russia, and the U.S. closer into conflict over time. Ultimately, the siege of Kyiv could go on for many weeks, if not months.
Yeah, and Clint, let's connect that back to what you just mentioned a minute ago, which I think, as I asked at the top, as people are wondering, oh my goodness, this nuclear power plant, we saw that flare drop down, there's a fire there, the potential danger that was, and why would they do that? You bring up these good points about the logistical aspect of it beyond just what the actual facility is known for. We know that this convoy has had trouble around Kyiv, logistical issues of its own. They've had these fueling issues, and they've also been, they've been resisted in a way by Ukrainian forces. When you talk about that railhead that they'd be able to have there, and we know that they've had trouble moving around, we know that their vehicles can't work well through the mud, through the countryside. What does that ultimately mean, the contact between the northern part of the country, potentially even the western part? We think about Lviv, that has been sort of this safe haven, mean when they get logistical, strategically smart points like that?
Yeah, so there's several things to always think about: airfields, railheads, and rail lines, and securing them in
It
between
has like a
cities. This
glow
convoy, as you
underneath
see
there,
right here,
which I gotta
notice
put
the
that in there.
spacing. This is a convoy that's not worried about
right
airstrikes
in
or
here.
air power. If they were,
Right.
they'd be much more disciplined. This is not the Soviet army that I learned about when I was at West Point. What you're seeing here is, in terms of these logistics, is they're starting to build up combat
There's
power.
that light
When you
is
look at where
shining
they're at
through the
now,
eyelet.
as they bring this in, they will have several lodgements which they can focus on, which will then control the rear area. The big mistake of this plan, if you fail in the first week, is you have major population centers behind your rear lines, and everything in the fight from here on out is about food, fuel, and ammunition. Russia's ability to do that versus Ukraine's. And this is where, as they build out this enlargement, you'll see here and from here, once they start to unify these, they now can bring in massive amounts of logistics much, much quicker. Meanwhile, Ukraine's ability to resupply and all of those classes of supply will go down. And so a war of attrition will essentially set in. I think it's going to be a tough slog. And it really comes down to the question is, what will the West do? Are we going to let this happen slowly and watch the entire country really fall into Russia's hands?
All right, Clint Watts, thank you so much. Really great information there. Obviously,
Just
a lot to
hurry
keep our
up.
eyes on. This is great to have you
Yeah,
there.
it's taking
Thanks.
so
Coming up, the
long.
war in Ukraine making an impact on the world of sports.
Up next, more on how athletes and organizations are weighing in on the violence. You're watching Morning News Now. In the sports world this week, we're hearing a different kind of rallying cry. We're hearing calls for Ukraine's freedom.
More athletes and organizations are speaking out against the Russian invasion of the country by the day. Here's NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky.
international sports arena sounding off, responding firmly to the war in Ukraine.
I believe that sport is a platform where which can help to spread good word, to change the world in some ways.
Athletes and sports organizations taking action.
It was a clear and unequivocal decision from all the players. It was very obvious for us that we have to boycott these games.
FIFA, UEFA, World Rugby, and the International Ice Hockey Federation all banning Russian national teams from participation.
I think that sports has to represent peace, justice. It's not enough to say how sorry you are. We have to react, and we have to show the world that we don't agree with that.
Sports like Formula One, rowing, skiing, and volleyball responded swiftly, canceling events and banning hosting opportunities, quote, until further notice. The World Athletics Council, which oversees track and field, cross-country, race walking, and ultra running, also sanctioning Russian and Belarusian athletes.
Understand that Russian athletes aren't directly involved in that war, but it's also important from their side to talk about it and talk that they don't agree with the war, because war is never a solution.
International swimming
But I mean,
organization
you can't blame Putin because how are you going to have someone, you say Ukraine say, Russia, you're my neighbor, but then you're okay with having NATO, you want to sign up with NATO, and pointing nuclear weapons towards my country, Russia.
Several members of the British Parliament called on the owner of English football club Chelsea, Roman Abramovich, a Russian billionaire, to hand over control of the team after almost 20 years at the helm. After handing over control to the team's charitable foundation, he confirmed in a statement Wednesday that he is trying to sell the team. Sports marketing campaigns also being affected. German sports company Adidas halted its 14-year partnership with the Russian Football Union.
Sport is very important. It's a country that, in an unreasonable way, attacks a other free country. In Ukraine shouldn't be allowed to participate in peaceful competitions.
Some Russian athletes think the bans are a quote unfair solution. Daniel Kia, an Alpine Formula One reserve driver, sharing a post on Twitter that says sports should remain outside politics, and banning athlete participation goes against what sports teaches us and its principle: the unity and peace.
We always say that we shouldn't combine politics with sports. Obviously, I agree up to a point, but tell it to the people who live in Ukraine and their league stopped. Their sport is not the thing they can think about right now. They fight for their lives.
But some of Russia's most prominent sports stars echo the world's anti-war message.
Please, no war. It doesn't matter who's in war. Russia, Ukraine, different countries.
What's supposed
I think we live in a world we have to live in peace.
All right, our thanks to Morgan Chesky for that report.
That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news continues right now.
This is walking right here. Right along right there.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.
And then this is supposed to come more in this one right there. Instead, I want to get that, and then this is a little bit more in there. And then this is fine. That mouth is supposed to go all the way to the back here.
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers.
We begin with day 7 of the war in Ukraine. Right now, Russian troops are gradually getting closer to the capital of Kyiv. Blasts and air raid sirens were heard across several major cities overnight. The Ukrainian military says Russians are trying to advance in all directions. This morning, also closing in on the southern city of Kherson, where this apartment building was hit by Russian shelling. Right now, Ukraine says it still
black and
controls the
white,
city, with the mayor there saying, quote,
gray to
"We are all
neutralize
waiting
it."
for a miracle right now."
As Russia intensifies attacks, Ukraine's president is telling Putin to stop the bombing and sit down at the negotiation table. And last night, President Biden spent part of his first State of the Union address talking about the invasion of Ukraine, announcing he's closing U.S. airspace to the Russians, further isolating Putin.
Russia's Vladimir
You
Putin
gotta
sought
sit
to
in
shake the
all
very foundation of the free
tables.
world, thinking he could make it bend
Zoom.
to his fancy ways. But he badly
They
miscalculated.
can just talk to each other online. I mean,
We begin our coverage this hour with NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel, who filed this report from Ukraine's capital, Kyiv.
I
This
don't
is the
know.
television tower here in Kiev that Russia targeted next to a Holocaust memorial.
close.
And it seems that Russian forces missed their main target because the tower is still standing. It is still working as Ukrainian resistance and Russian logistical problems are slowing down Vladimir Putin's assault.
Firefighters overnight battled what could be the flames of President Putin's frustration after fresh Russian attacks overnight. Russia has intensified its air and missile assaults as Russian forces lay siege to Ukraine's second city, Kharkiv. It could be a trial run for the capital, killing, a health official said, more than 20 civilians across the city since yesterday. Ukraine's President Zelensky accused Russia of using brutality against civilians to force him to sign a deal with Moscow, likely for his exit. And the international community is protesting those tactics. 100 diplomats walking out of a speech by Russia's foreign minister at the UN Human Rights Council on Tuesday, as a 40-mile Russian convoy is heading toward Kiev. But its progress is stalled, U.S. officials say, because of a lack of fuel and food. Russian forces are still expected to encircle and attack the capital after Ukrainians said Russia bombed a key television tower and a Holocaust memorial site. In Kiev, we went to Ukraine's biggest hospital for mothers and babies. The cold storage area downstairs, now a ward for fragile patients. Katerina's two daughters, Diana and Sophia, were born at 5 months. They were in an oxygen chamber together when the Russians started bombing. We had to rush down here as we were hearing the sirens and explosions, she says. Look at this place. It's old and rusty. We don't know how long we'll be here.
What about your family? Have you been able to see the rest of your family, or are you just here by yourself?
I have a brother who helped me, but he's a soldier and has been activated, so I have nobody else. Oksana's daughter Nicole was born with complex needs and requires constant care.
How's Nicole?
We were giving her a blood transfusion every 2 weeks, but now her condition is getting worse and she feels worse, Oksana says.
How are you feeling? I have a child myself who has special needs and has extra health issues. And I know how powerless you can feel to be a parent with a sick child.
It is very hard, she says. We want this war to stop because our kids suffer and we cannot go home.
And as that convoy slowly makes its way toward this city, Kiev's
the
mayor
kids,
told
man,
residents
that's what I
to
hate.
stock up on supplies and get ready
Kids
to
get
defend their
stuck
city. And
between
for the first time
the grown-ups
since this conflict broke out, Ukrainian troops announced
having
that
these
they went
stupid
today
fights.
on the offensive.
All right, Richard, thank you so much.
Let's bring in Colonel Mark
Stupid
Hansen,
bastards.
Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Good morning to you. You just heard Richard's report from Kyiv.
Then they
What do
become
you make of the
grown-ups.
Russian advances so far, including these attacks on places where civilians live?
Well, we're entering the second phase of the offensive. In the first phase, the Russians
They become
counted
Putin.
on the Ukrainians collapsing. The Russians had started this shock and awe campaign, with missile attacks and air attacks on airfields and headquarters. And then they invaded along 3 axes, along the north towards
And it's funny because when they're
in the
small, there's
northeast,
kids, they
towards Kharkiv, and in the south out
all
of
get along.
Crimea. And they sent armored columns ahead to try to capture cities before Ukrainian defenses could be established. Those columns were pushed back and defeated. Now the Russians are doubling down on their invasion. They're bringing up additional forces as we've
Over
seen.
here.
And unfortunately, this second phase is likely to be very violent.
Let me clean
Russian
this
doctrine
up.
calls for the massive application of firepower. We're seeing that in Kharkiv now, and I think in this
And this
second
one goes
phase,
like this.
as the Russians launch a series of offensives, we're going to see a lot more of that, and unfortunately, a lot of civilian casualties.
This one
Colonel,
comes
let's talk
here.
about the international response.
then
President
there's
Biden
a
announced
dark
last night the U.S. is banning
strip.
Russian planes from U.S. airspace, just the latest move to
It's
try
like
and
2
isolate
dark
Russia.
strips.
What more would you like to see the U.S. and allies do, and what will be the clues you're looking for to see if these actions are having any impact at all?
This dark strip.
Well, the international community is already doing a lot. The sanctions have been very severe. The economic isolation of Russia is increasing, and you're seeing a lot of secondary effects. Institutions around the world taking their own actions.
It's like a combination of so many things to make this thinking work.
More of that increasing Russian isolation so that the ordinary Russian citizen feels it, I think would be a very good step, and it's happening. We're doing weapons transfers. We're sending supplies. It's possible to increase those. There's been some talk about maybe sending aircraft, Soviet-era aircraft that the Ukrainians could use immediately. There was some back and forth on that with NATO. An embargo of oil and natural gas seems to be off the table because the Europeans are so dependent on Russian oil and natural gas. One idea that's floating around that I think would be very dangerous is a no-fly zone. It sounds benign, but what we saw in Iraq when the United States imposed that is that that would entail war with Russia. You'd have to send hundreds of aircraft over to attack Russian aircraft and airfields. We'd have to suppress their air defenses. It would be war with Russia, and I don't think there's any support for that among the public, and certainly we're not ready for that.
Colonel, while I have you, I want to talk to you about the support we're seeing from especially Europe and the West really uniting behind Ukrainians, levying these severe sanctions on Russia. What does this mean for alliances like NATO, what we've seen over the last few days and weeks?
This crisis has revitalized NATO. Just a couple of years ago, the United States was struggling to get NATO to increase its spending and to take the threat in the East more seriously. The alliance has been very united. Even members who were thought maybe to be a little iffy, like Hungary, have come along with diplomatic actions. And the Germans have done a complete reversal. A month ago, they were essentially appeasing Putin. Now they've shut down Nord Stream 2, and they've pledged to increase their defense spending, which had been very low, and the German military forces had been really in a very bad way. So I think going forward, you're going to see NATO increasing its spending and taking more aggressive actions.
All right, Colonel Martianskian, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Now to the growing refugee crisis in Central Europe, the United Nations estimates more than 660,000 people have fled Ukraine in the past week, including countless families with children. NBC News senior national correspondent Tom Yamas has been speaking with some of those families, watching very emotional goodbyes, and he joins us now from Lviv in western Ukraine. Hi, Tom. Good morning.
That's another thing. I gotta take my glasses off because you wear your glasses and
I've seen no sign of this slowing down, this refugee crisis. Just behind me, these are some of the Ukrainians trying to get out of here. They've been waiting for hours, they tell me, hoping to get on a train to Poland. The sad reality is that a lot of the trains today are leaving to border towns. Still in Ukraine, though, Romania, Poland, Hungary. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get out, but at least you'll get closer. And for all of these people, especially all these families, they're willing to take that risk.
what page am I on? That can't be it. Let me get out of here. Alright, let me check. Then I can apply some glazes. What am I on? Am I on Facebook or? No, I'm on YouTube. There you go. So, I don't know. I guess. Let me put this over here. Oh. Oh shit! It's I can't even. All this light is. Okay, the light is killing me. Sometimes I gotta kill the light. So I can be. I have to come back and look at this with fresh eyes. The face. I'm still not happy at all. Face. I'm not happy with this. I'm not happy with it. The reflection of the light is many things throwing me off. Alright, that's better. Gotta do that. I wanna see the sleeves. I gotta darken all this. She's looking a little too flat. So, you know what this rock is here? This is the most expensive pigment in the world. This right here. This is the most expensive pigment. A couple of ounces is like $80. But guess what? I've been painting for 40 years. I'm a master at this. So I said to myself, well, okay, the pigment is $70. How much is a gemstone? Gemstones are very inexpensive, but the pigment is expensive. So I bought gemstones. You see? Gemstones? It's topalis, like how you pronounce the pigment. You see, this is all pigment in there. Just haven't finished crushing it yet. This is gonna make a lot. Like this right there. It's the best blue you can ever buy. I'm gonna finish this transistor radio. Soldering it. But oh, I'm gonna finish this. So, figure out how I'm gonna crush that. But I'm gonna. The sleeves need to be darker, so I'm gonna have to go over those. Over the white, and then. Excuse me. And okay, get this. Let me see how that looks like that. Then I'll do the white over. But I want this to be. That's better. Alright, so. Alright. I'll come in again. The sleeve needs to get darker. The sleeve needs to be darker. It won't look so flat. You see how I lower the light? So, you got a lot of people today that will tell you, oh, you're gonna get a certain light bulb when you paint. It can't be too warm and it can't be too cool. It's a certain number. I think it's 5,000 something. I don't know. It's a certain number. But I always thought to myself, but the fucking guys in the Renaissance, they didn't have no fucking light bulbs. What are these people talking about? So I said to myself, how about if I start painting with no light, just candlelight? What would that do? And I did that for like a week. You see the values in the painting a lot better than if you was to use light. It's like if you wear sunglasses. Like they teach you in art school to squint. Well, when you wear sunglasses, do a painting with sunglasses. Like if you're having problems that your values are not dark enough, train your eyes to see through a darker shade, like sunglasses, and that way you get your values darker. Because to express light, you need dark. And if you don't have enough dark, your lights are going to look, they're not going to look very good. You see what I mean? And your edges, you got to work on your edges. You don't want it to look like a cutout. So certain areas you got soft, and some areas you want like this. See the way I come past it. And then it's trickery. The eye. So this doesn't look very good now, but I'm gonna get the fan brush. What's that fan brush? Fan brush. Fan brush. Oh, there goes the ashtray. Should have a fan brush around here somewhere. Over here. How about over here? It doesn't have to be a fan brush, but I prefer it to be a fan brush. Prefer it to be a fan brush. Excuse me. Alright, so, okay, let me just get this. Fumata. Fumata is a technique that was developed by Da Vinci. It's called smoke. And I'll cut back into it, then I have to cut a little higher in. That's what I'll do. Okay, that'll be fine. Then I can come. Now that I went up past the line, then let me get this out of here. See the way I put a little wire brush, a piece of wire. You buy one of these, and then I took a piece of cable wire, a hanger, and wrapped it around the thing. So now, when I dip the brush in here, right, this is not going to get it all dry, but if I do this, I get it real dry, and all the liquid drops right back in the container. And then this cardboard prevents it from it going over there. Okay? Okay, where's that white? That blue's gray. Let's use that for now. I could have done that, but I'm going to use this. bit of I got a bit of that Neil McGrip. Fucking bastards. Wasn't supposed to live in this era. There you have Sirens in the Renaissance. Okay, now that burgundy in the back, I was supposed to, but being that I'm holding the damn phone, I didn't get this clean. How I do that? Now I'll grab it again. Just drop it right there for now. Right, then I'll come in tomorrow. And then try that. Me. Just drop it in there. Just drop it. Just drop it. Okay. Then I'll figure out how I'm gonna do that. Figure out how I'm gonna do that. But if I do that, I'm really dedicating too much work, too much time to this painting. But it's one of my first pieces going modern. So, but it shouldn't be all that perfect. It's my first one. So, I mean, they're gonna understand. They should fucking understand. The other stuff will be better, but this one, it's not supposed to be all that perfect. So, maybe I'm putting too much time. So, yeah, that's what I'll do. Yeah. Well, everything needs balance. Everything. One thing can't be stronger than anything else. One thing cannot be stronger. I really went wrong with this piece, but in modern, you have no choice with these colors. But I'm gonna keep it only with a couple of values, different hues. I'm not gonna go running all over the place with different, all these colors. If you look at all the, even in classical, they only added 2 or 3 colors. The difference that made it look like there was so much color was the values. It wasn't the hues, it was the values. Everything here is brown, yellow, black, brown. Same thing here. Everything here. Everything here. Nothing fights too much with the subject where you have to fight to look at the painting. It's here, it's I come here and it's It's like a fucking 10 round fight before I settle on looking at her. It's like what the hell's going on here? I mean, I get it, it's modern, but it's just me getting comfortable with it because I'm not really on to that fucking modern. But what Dolly said, what does he say about modern? Let me see. He used to do something similar to what I had there. But maybe Dolly, he would do things like that. Color. You see, like that's like really busy. A lot of stuff going on there. Got this, got this, got this. You got this. What makes it work? Balance, right? Everything is well balanced, but still it's in color. But it's not a lot of color. 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 Take something here. It's taking everything away. I think it's the green or I think it's the blue. Okay, green and red. It's primaries. I don't have too much there. Maybe I can just do all the back with the green and do all those shapes, just different grades of that green, different values of that green. And that will probably look better if I was to do that. I'm just gonna leave it. I'm just gonna do the sleeve, do that. And I can't. You see, I don't know, man. Fucking painting. It's the thing with the painting is, it's like then you make a painting like that, you put it to the side, and you let it. You don't look at it for a year, then you come back, and you screw it up. Oh my God. It's like you have to take care of it now. It's that type of painting that you have to take care of it now. Because if you try to come back to it, that sugar's over here. You come back to it later on, and you lose that. Then the feather, that feather, I gotta get rid of that feather. I think I will put up on her. She's got the hand for it, I mean. She's got the hand for it. I mean, it's the time to living. I mean, violence. You can't complain about it. You can't complain about it. You really can't complain about it. What are you writing? Yeah, fuck you. We'll start over, but with a fucking other canvas. Why would you even say such stupid shit like that? I see you laughing right now. You're like those cookie cutters that cut cookies and they're all the same. You don't say anything that's intelligent, that's... If you would have been Gauguin, Van Gogh would have not been Van Gogh. He probably would have no ears. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of that feather. That blue from that feather. I'm gonna get rid of that. Maybe I'll put a dildo. You want me to put a dildo? How about a dildo? 12-inch dildo. Look at that, just removing the feather. Yeah, that's so much fucking better. That's so much fucking better. Yeah, that is so much better. Yeah, okay. I got rid of that. Who's that artist from the village? He did a huge piece, and then he has a character with a gun, but it's a revolver, the old style type of guns. Well, I can put one of those type of guns. I think it sold for 60 grand. But you see, being an artist is not just painting good. You gotta have some history. Do you have any history? Is there anything about yourself that will add to the story of your life, that it will make you more interesting? What have you done? Where have you been? Even that alone is so, that alone, that was it. The fucking feather, that feather was competing with everything. That feather was competing with everything. Now, what it tells me is that whatever I do put in the hair has to be the same color, like a black or something that's not so bright. That it could just sit, you know. It's there, but it's not so noticeable that. So this is fine. This is fine like that. Even with all this is fine. I'm okay with that. In fact, let me use the rest of that blue over here. In some areas here. Fucking shit, man. The fuck? What the fuck was... This fucking dude upstairs, man. Hate this fucking building. Get the fuck out of here. Fucking building. Alright, so I think that's kind of better that way. I think that's so much better. The painting, I can just put a big fucking thin X right down the center. Very transparent that you can still see the picture behind it. A fucking X from here. That way. A bright red, but very transparent. Which I think I'm gonna do that. And then I can live with it. And I'll write behind it something. I'm gonna send it to the fucking gallery. That motherfucker there with it. To the gallery. They can deal with it. Very painfully. I can put a regular, and put 369, 3, 6, 9. Do 369. 369. I'm gonna pay you a visit tonight. Is that okay? I'm gonna do some astro, find out who the fuck you are. I think we've spoken enough. We've made enough of a connection that I can pick you up. Don't get nervous when I grab you by the neck. Why did you say that? Oh, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. I was just joking. I was joking. I was joking. Oh, fuck. This is my other palette knife that went bad on me. What is that ashtray? I'll use this ashtray, put this cover back.
reports DNA. DNA helps crack the case.
It's been rough, you know, but my dad was a very big part of our lives, not just mine, but my brothers, my sisters, my mom.
Jose Tellez' eldest son, David, says the murder of his father on December 11th has left a gaping hole in their family. Police say Tellez was beaten to death by Pedro Mendiola and Moises Barrios as he put up Christmas lights outside his Gage Park home. The two are accused of committing more than a dozen robberies that day, starting at 4 p.m. and attacking Tellez around 6 p.m.
They got out with their bat and their crowbar, and unfortunately the daughter heard the screams and saw in the window what was happening and tried to get her brother to help. By that time, the defendants had already beaten the victim to death and had fled the scene.
Mendiola and Barrios' rampage finally ending around 8 p.m. on the south side. Barrios was arrested the day of the attack. Detectives say they found the bat and crowbar in Barrios' car, and that led to fingerprint and DNA evidence linking him and Mendiola to the robberies and murder. David says when he got word that the two men who senselessly killed his father outside their home were caught, he was overcome with a mix of emotions.
Sadness, anger, happiness, any emotion you could think of, it just hit me during that phone call. I was happy that they finally caught him. I was sad because I'm still missing him, you know?
CBS 2 has learned both men have lengthy criminal histories. Barrios dates back to 2016 and includes burglary, domestic battery, and possession of a weapon. Mendiola has been arrested multiple times for battery since 2019, as well as retail theft and possession of a weapon. Both men now face murder charges for the death of Tellez and more than 20 felony charges for the robberies. In Gage Park, I'm Meredith Barrett.
Piece of shit, huh? Back in the days when we fucking hurt people for fucking owing money, not for shit like that, man. People are fucking crazy. Alright. Let me shut this off. Let me, where the fuck am I? Hold on. 44. Get the fuck out of here, man. Fucking cool. Get the fuck out of here.